my microphone. Wow, is that loud?
That is loud.
Yikes. We're going to open up the hearing for HB 602 and hear from our prime sponsor, Rep. Simon. Welcome, Rep. Thank you for your service. Thank you for being here. It's a beautiful day. Hope you had a great weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. It was a great weekend, and I'm happy to be here with you this morning to introduce for the committee's consideration HB 602, a bill that would create a bifurcated process for siting new landfills in the state of New Hampshire. It introduces the concept of a preliminary application for which DES would have rulemaking authority to introduce at least one, if not more, preliminary siting criteria with the purpose of basically making it so that an applicant doesn't have to go through the entire application process before they can find out whether the site is really suited for a landfill or not. DES would come up with very specific siting criteria. They'd have a preliminary process they could check to make sure the site was suitable first, and then if it was, they could continue on with the rest of the process, saving both the state and the applicant money and time. If for some reason the site isn't suitable, there's no prejudice given back. If it can be corrected, great, and they can continue forward. If not, they can pursue another site and reapply for that site for the landfill. So it's a pretty simple bill. That's the nuts and bolts of it. I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can from the committee.
So they can't do that already, the department?
No, a full proposal has to be, application has to be submitted before consideration. So it's a much more lengthy process. It takes a lot more time and money for both the applicant and DES to consider all of the information. So this would just allow them to have a smaller set of criteria that looks very specifically at whatever it really has a lot of flexibility for DES. They're able to come up with the rules themselves. The bill gives a few things that they could take into consideration, but doesn't mandate that they take any of those things into consideration. Also doesn't limit them to those considerations. But it would allow them to streamline the process. Other states do this as well.
Excellent. Questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for bringing the bill in. So have you worked with DES on this bill, and have you received input from them? Are they okay with this process?
So I don't know specifically, to be honest with you. 602, the original bill, doesn't look anything like the bill that's before you. It's been amended. So I could speak much more intelligently on the original bill. I know people have been working with DES, but I'm not sure about the answer to that question at this point.
Thank you.
So this bill doesn't direct them, it just gives them the ability to make some shortcuts.
Yes, exactly. So it gives them the flexibility that they need to make the rules that they think are appropriate, while at the same time still giving us the opportunity to help kind of direct the process in a way that we feel like would be beneficial both to the applicant and to the state. So yeah, they don't have to use any of the criteria listed there. They're just ideas. And they could also bring forward criteria that they think is beneficial that isn't listed there.
So on line 11, it says the department shall, in its discretion and informed by the public hearing subsequent to written public comment, adopt one or more. So the public has more of a say as far as what the department does.
They would have public input, yeah. Once again, as with all rulemaking processes, they can reject input from the public and give reasons for the rejection of that input. But the public does have the opportunity to at least give that input ahead of time for their consideration.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee? Any further questions? Seeing none, we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Very welcome. And so, Tom Tower? So do they call you Mr. T?
You can if you'd like, Senator. Good morning, everybody.
Appreciate it.
We appreciate the committee taking some time and allowing me to speak today. Appreciate it very much. For the record, my name is Tom Tower. I reside in Whitefield, New Hampshire, and I also represent North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. Like a lot of the bills and a lot of the history relating to solid waste over the past number of years, I felt like it was important to kind of give a little bit of a backstory on this one. As Representative Simon spoke, this bill was originally introduced in 2023, and it emulated a lot of what Maine actually has as part of their siting process, which in essence, is kind of an entry exam, right? But it was, as a lot of these bills are, kind of hotly contested and debated. But the House Environment and Agriculture Committee felt it was important to at least retain the bill. So it was retained and then resurrected this year and basically addressed some of what DES had to say about it last year, which was that it was prescriptive and that there were some distinguished differences between, say, the state of New Hampshire and what the state of Maine does historically. So the bill was amended to basically allow for the department to have complete discretion over what this entrance exam would look like. The essence of this, though, is we feel like it's pro-business, and it's pro-business from the perspective of when you submit, excuse me, a permit application, it's a very, very costly process. This would be a fraction of the cost, and it quickly determines whether or not a site would be suitable to site a landfill or not, whether or not the site would be knocked out. Today, you submit an application, it's many person years to process, costing the state a lot of money and costing the applicant a lot of money. So we think this is a simple bill. We think that this will save both the state and business money. And I'm sitting here today urging you to support House Bill 602.
So, thank you for your testimony. Were you there when the department came in and testified on this?
Yes.
And by how much time will it shorten it, and you know what will this do as far as saving the applicant's money, and you know what are we looking at as figures?
You know, I don't know the exact amounts of money, Senator, but it could be, you know, thousands of dollars for the applicant to submit a permit. DES is better suited to answer that, say, than I would. But I would think that this would cut the time down dramatically to a fraction of the time, because you could quickly determine whether or not, you know, soils and call it surface and groundwater were more susceptible because of, you know, whatever site that the applicant was choosing to site the landfill.
Questions from the committee? Well done.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, sir. Eric? It's Steinhauser?
Steinhauser, yes.
Yes, I did. All right. Good for me. And you're representing yourself.
Good morning. Thank you for. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. There we go. Technology. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning about House Bill 602. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser. I'm a senior vice president, principal with Sanborn Head and Associates, a New Hampshire-based engineering firm. I've handed out a copy. I'm not going to read this in total. I want to address a couple of things that I've heard that are additional to my written testimony. My written testimony talks about redundancy in the legislation to the rules, which will, I think, cause confusion with the regulated community as well as with the regulators themselves. DES has a robust regulatory process that hit all the things that this bill is talking about. The commentary so far has been about saving time and saving cost. For the last 20 years that I've been in New Hampshire, I've been involved in many landfill permitting processes. The biggest cost that our clients have is that initial part. That's not thousands of dollars, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our clients are spending close to millions of dollars just to figure out if the site's going to work. The process that DES has is a bifurcated process. There's a standard permit in which we are showing that the site works and that there's a proof of concept that the landfill can be built. After that is approved by the state, there's a second permitting process called a Type 2 permit, where we actually give the construction of the facility. So there is a bifurcated process that doesn't need to be redundant in a legislative manner. What would result from that would be additional time and additional cost because of confusion between legislation and rule that will lead to appeals and slowing down projects. We all know there's a solid waste disposal issue in the state. lengthening the processes for determining whether a site is valid or not just adds more to the crisis in having waste capacity available in the state when it needs to be. Happy to discuss any questions on my oral or written testimony.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
So since I asked Rep. Simon the question, I did find we have a letter here from DES which shares a little bit of the same concern I think that you're raising. So it appears that probably the more expensive part of what they have to do is that hydrogeologic study. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, sir.
And that is also would be required in order for them to meet the new process under this legislation. Is that correct?
I think the process proposed in the legislation is already currently in the rules. It's just making an extra step. In order to, the hydrogeologic process starts collecting data about the site. Is the site valid or not? Then I'm a design engineer at the hydrogeologist part. We take that information. Can we make a site fit? What other data do we need? We might have to go back. Oftentimes we do go back into the ground and find out more information to see how we can make a site viable or not. And then if it's not, we stop. Nothing comes forward to the state. The applicants, unless the site is valid, they're not going to take it any further. We're going to cut it off. And I've been in projects where we very early in the game cut off projects because they don't make sense. They don't make sense because not enough land, developable land to make projects viable. And that's whether it's for a municipality or private. The projects have to work. We're going to find out earlier. So our clients are doing that bifurcated process even earlier to make sure sites are going to work. They're going to spend hundreds to millions of dollars of figuring out that it can work and then go through that process. And again, we have a bifurcated process already with the state's rules.
Follow? So in your opinion, would most all of that work still be required to even comply with the language in this new bill that we're considering today?
Yes, in my written testimony, I said that there's 7 criteria. All those are covered either in the solid waste rules or other related rules that landfills have to follow, whether they're in the water quality, the wetlands, or other state and federal guidelines. And if you're developing a site in some other jurisdiction, we have to follow those siting criteria too. So there might be other rules that get put on top of that. So it's not just the solid waste rules that the applicant has to follow, it's the solid waste rules and all the other rules that any development project has to adhere to.
Thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is anybody from the department here? Would you like to come up and talk?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, there was one in the folder.
I didn't get it.
Oh, this is it. It's been
I guess I had an advance letter, I don't know.
You're special.
How do you rate?
I don't know.
Look at you, the advanced copy too.
I'm definitely getting a complex.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sarah Uhas Kern, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Waste Management Division at DES. DES is not taking a position on this bill, and we would like to share some concerns with the committee about it. While we recognize that other states have a process that has a siting phase in their landfill permitting, and we could implement this sort of a pre-application phase with our process, we note that the applicant would have to invest in a complex hydrogeologic investigation in order to demonstrate that they meet the siting criteria. And also in that pre-permitting phase, they would need to provide us with a preliminary design of the landfill, because you can't evaluate a site for a landfill unless you can see what the proposed footprint is. So they would invest in those items, and once DES had reviewed them, there's a chance that the outcome would be that the location was not approved. As it's envisioned in the bill, what we would do if the location was not approved is we would return the application to the applicant, which does not seem to be the same as a decision to deny, and we question whether the applicant would have the right to appeal that return of an application. Applicants may take issue with not having the right to appeal the essential denial of their siting location. When we get on to the second part of the bill that provides the suggested location prohibitive criteria, of the criteria that are listed, some of them are already addressed in the existing siting section of New Hampshire's solid waste rules. Some of them are proposed to be addressed in amendments to the solid waste rules that we intend to file with the Office of Legislative Services soon. And some of them would be difficult to implement because they would introduce significant subjectivity into the permitting process. That's a summary of our concerns, and I appreciate having a chance to testify on this bill. I'd be happy to answer questions that you have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And Senator Waters.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Just to confirm, if we could, what Mr. Steinhauser suggested and you did. So you feel that criteria 1 through 6, either in existing rules or the ones you're proposing, are covered?
In existing rules, proposed rules, also as you heard previously in testimony, in other rules that applicants are required to follow.
Okay. And if I may follow up. And so then number 7, other factors the department in its discretion considers worthwhile. That to me seems like a bit of a legal quagmire. Would that be your sense of it too?
It is very broad.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. In this case, it's quaking.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. In the current rules, I don't have them in front of me, so I'm relying on your expertise here. At what stage in the process that we currently have from the beginning of the application process to breaking ground, where is the public involved?
In the current process, there is a public hearing held for a proposed landfill before a decision is made by DES to issue a permit. The public hearing is held in the locality of the proposed landfill, and also there's a written public comment period. And the oral comments and the written comments that we receive inform our decision on the permit application and also inform potential special conditions that we might put on a permit to address concerns that have been brought up.
May I follow up? So in that space, when there is the opportunity for the public to engage, has the applicant already done the hydraulic connectivity measurement testing? Have they already engaged in what you have described as the the previous person, Mr. Steinhauser, said is an incredibly expensive process, and that what is proposed here, this bifurcation, would be cost prohibitive on the front end. Is a lot of that expense already laid out prior to the public getting involved and being able to express their concerns or anything around the project? Like, where in the spending of the money are we?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, by the time the public hearing happens, the applicant has done that hydrogeological investigation, submitted a proposed design, probably had some back and forth with DES where we may have asked for some additional details as well.
Yeah, last question. So in the process that we have now, and I understand that, I hear what you're saying, that DES has some proposals for rule changes, but those are proposals. Those don't exist right now. So we're talking about what we have right now. And it's very expensive. It's very expensive to site a landfill. It really is. And it's even more expensive and dangerous for it to not be done or cited properly. So, there's no inexpensive way to go about this. So in what we have and what's proposed here, where would the cost savings be? Would it benefit an applicant to stick with the process that we have, and would that serve both the community and the applicant if indeed there was some friction? Or does this process reduce that friction on the front end of the process itself? Because I think that's what the proposal is, but I want to hear your assessment of those two scenarios. That's how I see this question.
That's a great question. I think you might get a more informed answer by asking it of someone who is in the business of costing these sorts of investigations and proposals for landfills, because DES does not get involved in the estimating of the costs for this. So perhaps if there's someone who is maybe an environmental consultant or something like that.
Thank you.
And if I may, if I'm trying to track with my colleague, does this streamline the process?
From DES's perspective, it does not streamline the process.
Either yes or no is what okay. Thank you very much. We appreciate you stepping up to the plate here.
Thank you.
And our final speaker would be Kirsten Koch from BIA. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch. I'm the Vice President of Public Policy at BIA. I'm here today to express BIA's opposition to this bill. I won't get into too much detail because some of the other experts have already covered most of it. But BIA opposes this bill because we see it as adding an unnecessary, redundant extra step to the permitting process. This bill ultimately makes the siting of new landfills more difficult. It establishes new requirements and an extra phase to the permitting application. We see this preliminary application phase as a kind of an anti-business roadblock that was implemented to stop the development of landfills. It has subjective requirements that are possibly difficult or unlikely to ever achieve in the state. The existing process already thoroughly considers environmental safety factors, and further, the solid waste rules are already in the process of being updated by the department, and we see that as being an effective process to establish any modern improvements that would be necessary considering advances in science. So we also have a concern that this bill would interfere with those necessary updates. So in conclusion, BI respectfully requests the committee find this bill inexpedient to legislate because it does establish this unnecessary, redundant regulatory burden on the business community. We have concerns. Thank you for your consideration. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you very much. And with that, we're going to close the hearing, and we're going to open up the hearing on HB 1386. Representative, you got some nice co-sponsors on here.
You might have heard of some of them.
Welcome to the committee.
Oh, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Karen Ebel, and I represent Merrimack District 7, which is New London and Newbury. This bill would ban the disposal in our solid waste facilities of lithium-ion batteries and it also updates and expands somewhat the definition of electronic waste. Electronic waste is already banned by statute in the state of New Hampshire, but from my reckoning, it looked like it hadn't been updated in 15 or 20 years, and technology has moved along a little bit, so I just corrected and updated slightly. The bill is, the primary focus of the bill, however, is the banning of the disposal of lithium-ion batteries. For a couple of reasons. The primary one is that they're extreme fire hazards when they're disposed of, and you'll have some people who have more expertise on the hazards here speaking to you today. But from the standpoint of the state stakeholder group, the Solid Waste Working Group, which I chair and of which Senator Pearl is a member, this was one of our top priority issues, because by banning the disposal of lithium-ion batteries, we're helping to reduce toxicity in the waste stream and increase the safety for public works employees, both of which are goals in our recently adopted solid waste management plan, which you're familiar with. By banning the disposal, it also helps promote recycling of this precious metal just at a time when lithium is more and more demand at all times. And the only other thing to note is that it was pointed out to us by stakeholders that although there was a provision, hold harmless provision for solid waste facilities, if they provided notice that disposal was banned, that they still would be held accountable if somebody disposed of it. So we did put a provision in there, and you'll see it on, what is it, page 1 of the actual bill. It's lines 3 to 14. And the other thing that we added on line 15, which everyone, all the stakeholders were agreeable to, was to make available, like online or something, educational materials on the safe disposal of these batteries. And I'm pretty much, by adding lithium-ion batteries, I'm adding to the ban we already have in place and have had for I don't know how many years on wet cell batteries. The only other thing to add is that I don't know if they contacted you directly, but the city of Nashua does support this bill, and I'm going to provide a copy to you folks. And Nate Grace of the New Hampshire Municipal Association apologizes, but I hope he doesn't mind. He had a fall this morning, and so right now he's getting x-rays, so he can't come. So I wanted to be sure that you folks knew that he supported it. I think you got a letter from the National Waste and Recycling Association, which represents the solid waste industry, expressing their concern about the disposal of these batteries. And I believe the fire marshal is here. He had intended to be here. And you also should have heard from the New Hampshire Association of Fire Chiefs. So with that, if you have any questions,
Thank you for your yeoman's work on this. And there is a section here where, under municipalities, it does talk about recycling, and they shall, there's a shall in here. I just want to highlight that. I like that.
Okay.
That's all.
Okay.
And Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative. So it seems to be the heart of the bill is getting the device definition plus the informational campaign. But the essence of enforcement here is that for those folks covered in lines 3 through 6, they'd be subject to the penalties in 149M15.
they would be, but, but just to reiterate, this hold harmless clause, I mean, I should.
No, I get that.
Yeah, okay.
I
fine.
just, what I'm going to ask about, and maybe somebody from DES can answer this, but I guess I'm wondering how such enforcement might take place.
Yes, and I think that's correct. That would be something for
Okay, thank you.
DES. And just, this hold harmless clause has existed for quite some time for leaf and yard waste, and it has also existed for electronic waste, so hopefully they'll be able to help you with that. It just was an inconsistency in the statute that that provision didn't apply to the wet cell disposal ban, and when I added lithium to it, we noted that there was an internal inconsistency in the statute, so that's why we added it in. And I was very pleased that people also agreed to the educational effort with the shall. So thank you.
Actually, yeah, I did. And because I tried to do legislation on this a number of years ago, as you may recall,
Yeah.
the lithium-ion batteries here are included in vaping devices.
Oh.
And so that would be covered under this.
Well, just to clarify, we, in the committee, there ended up being a big discussion between lithium-ion batteries and lithium batteries. And I don't know whether lithium-ion batteries are in vaping things, but, you know, they're in little kids' shoes. I mean, unfortunately, they're all over the place. But from a recycling standpoint, it's really a difficult challenge, and taking input from experts in the field, it was felt that we should stick to lithium-ion batteries for the purposes of this bill.
That might be the distinction, because I might have in my hearing aids too.
Yeah, yeah, I
And they
mean,
go in the trash.
we
Thank
did
you.
go
I'll
around
check.
and around
All
on
right.
it in the committee, and, you know, they're just these little dots, and it's challenging. So, thank you. Anything else? Okay, yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Garrett Trierweiler. I'm Director of Public Affairs for Waste Management. Waste Management is currently the leading provider of waste management and environmental services in the United States. In New Hampshire, we own and operate the Turnkey Landfill in Rochester. We also have 4 solid waste transfer stations, recycling facility, and about 200 waste and recycling trucks that grace your fine streets around the state. We are here today in support of House Bill 1386. As was mentioned before, lithium-ion batteries are a type of rechargeable battery that can be bought individually or used in many products: electronics, toys, wireless headphones, handheld power tools, small, large appliances, electric vehicles. They're everywhere. Unfortunately, when they're disposed of improperly, these batteries can be very problematic for waste transfer stations and recycling facilities. EPA determined that most lithium-ion batteries on the market are likely to be hazardous waste when they're disposed of, because they can't catch fire or explode if handled incorrectly. To that point, several of our facilities here in the state have been impacted by improper disposal of these batteries. In 2023, we experienced fires at our Rochester recycling facility, one that almost destroyed the entire building, and 2 fires at our Auburn transfer station as well. Several years ago, a fire at our Laconia transfer station resulted in its closure for an extended period of time and cost over $100,000 to repair the damage. These are only a few of the examples what we've experienced around the country. As was also noted, our industry trade association, the National Waste and Recycling Association, they recently released a report that estimates that 5,000 fires occur annually at recycling facilities alone, and that's not include transfer stations. These fires result in tremendous costs. We're here to support this legislation. We believe a ban on disposing these batteries is a critical and important step to getting them out of these facilities and stopping these fires. And if I had to rate nationally what Waste Management's top legislative priorities are for the year, lithium batteries is probably at the top of the list.
How do we handle enforcement?
I think that's come up every step of the way here, and I think that is a very serious challenge. I think the key, we work with our customers, we educate the best we can. It's one thing to say there it's not advisable to dispose of, you should do it. It does help when it's illegal. I do think that's a part. I think it then helps generate education. It really does come down to education. I can honestly tell you, Senator, I don't know every place that these batteries are because they are so prevalent. And the unfortunate reality is their use is only going to increase. We're only have more and more on the market in more and more devices. So if we don't start somewhere, ban them from disposal, educate consumers, educate folks, and if enforcement is required, I mean, I think that's going to be a tough thing. But other states are also taking the next step after banning, which is maybe an extended producer responsibility, where the manufacturers of the batteries commit to funding programs for the collection. So there are other things also to do as we go forward. I think the ban is a critical first step to starting that process.
So Senator Waters has batteries in for his ears. Those are lithium. But for the public's edification, what would a typical lithium-ion battery be?
So you could buy rechargeable AA batteries at the store. Okay, they're in your phone. Basically, rechargeable batteries are going to mostly be lithium-ion batteries. So there's a video that I'm more than happy to send the committee of it's a rechargeable AA battery that someone cut open, put one, and to see it, that one small AA battery literally explode. You know, it was in a controlled environment, so it was fine. But what happens is when these batteries are put in the trash or put in recycling and they get dumped on the tip floor, and you've got a large front-end loader running back and forth, moving material, and then they get trampled and they get hit and they break, and that's when they open, and that's when they can get wet, and that's when they turn into fires. So that's why they're really problematic in MRFs and in transfer stations.
And there's no way to detect it if somebody just throws it in their garbage can.
That's when you put it in a black bag, it could be a number of things that shouldn't be in there, and that's the problem. And that's where, again, the education starts. I mean, again, I know years ago, I first started in this industry with Wheelabrator, who did the waste to energy, and they still have the site. Mercury, button cell batteries. A lot of people didn't realize that by putting those in the trash, if they do make its way to a waste energy facility, that's going to burn and it's going to go out the stack. So they committed and they put together a very extensive radio campaign. Don't put mercury in the trash, thermostats, all the different things. So I could see something similar here, right? So same kind of thing, like educate folks as to where these batteries are and how to dispose of them properly.
So at say Turnkey, you have a specific place for the batteries. Throw your disposals here where your cell phone.
I think a lot of drop-offs could have a designated spot, absolutely, for that.
Right.
That'd be a great way to start, right? I think you're right. Commercial on residential homes that have a curbside collection, we have to get to those folks as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Further questions? Okay, well, I saw that one.
Go ahead.
I'll get you after. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Go ahead.
Where you just said that a couple of your facilities have had fires, are you concerned at all that if this continues, that insurance will become a problem?
One of the many costs, absolutely. I hate to say daily, but I think company-wide, we probably have a fire. I mean, again, somewhere, and we do, we're investing a lot in fire suppression, all the things that, you would want to do in a site that these could happen, but the bigger the battery, the bigger the issue. So sometimes they're isolated and smaller, but absolutely. I mean, again, we've had 2 facilities now pretty much taken almost to the ground here, just in New Hampshire. So insurance would be an additional cost for sure.
Thank you.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have determined that my hearing aid batteries are not lithium-ion, but the rechargeable ones are, and I don't have those.
Just worry about your safety.
I'm too flames.
Walk in the rain.
Coming out of my ears, right? Sorry for the interlude there, with the chair.
Right.
But anyways, I do think we are starting to see replacements for lithium-ion that are non-flammable in a lot of devices just for these reasons. And I do, I think some of us aspire to extended producer responsibility. But that said, the gist of your testimony is that this is an important first step for the industry.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes.
Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
So we have a representative from Casella in support not wishing to speak. Adam Schmidt with the New Hampshire Association of somebody, of fire chiefs, there you go. Sorry, Adam, my eyes are, also in support, not wishing to speak, so, Michael Nork? Nork? Nork. Wishing to speak, basically, not in support, not against.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Michael Nork, and I am representing the Solid Waste Management Bureau for New Hampshire DES. And to be clear, yes, we are neutral on the bill. We do support the intent of the bill from the standpoint of reducing the toxicity of the waste stream and also increasing safety at solid waste facilities. You know, this bill would, as was mentioned by previous testimony, the primary objective is to ban disposal of lithium-ion batteries, and it would also expand the, or broaden the list of electronic items that are banned from disposal in landfills and incinerators in the state. With regard to lithium-ion batteries, I think it's very clear in the industry as well as within the regulatory world, lithium-ion batteries are a safety hazard if they're improperly disposed. If they're, as the representative from Waste Management mentioned, if they're mixed with other wastes, whether it be waste and refuse sent for disposal at a landfill or incinerator, or in a mixed recycling stream where it gets sent in a truck that has like a compactor, you know, these batteries can become damaged and pose a major fire risk. It's a risk during transport. It's a risk at the tipping floor of the transfer station. It's a risk at the landfill itself. The city of Lebanon has had several fires that they believe were the caused by lithium-ion batteries that were mixed in with the trash. So there's been a number of issues nationally and also here at solid waste facilities in the state of New Hampshire. So it's clearly a safety issue. These batteries, these lithium-ion batteries, are ubiquitous. They're becoming, I mean, we all have them in our pocket right now in our cell phone. Senator Altschiller's laptop has a lithium-ion battery. The power tools that you have in your basement, often if they have a rechargeable battery, those are lithium-ion batteries. Children's toys. Senator Waters, to your question, vapes very often do have a lithium-ion battery in them. So they're just, they're all over the place. So the department recognizes that safe management of these batteries is often accomplished through separate collection, a dedicated collection and recycling program. And there are organizations that do promote best management practices for management of lithium-ion batteries and other rechargeable batteries. There's a group called Call to Recycle, which is a national stewardship organization that's funded by the battery manufacturers. And that group does have a separate collection program, dedicated collection, where they actually distribute boxes that get sent to municipalities or businesses where they can actually have a collection point for those batteries so that they're managed separately from the rest of the waste stream and can be safely managed and recycled. And so that program does exist. It's often a cost for municipalities and for businesses that want to collect the batteries, but I think having a place for the batteries to go is a key component of a ban. You can't just ban something if there's no alternative place for it to go. I think there was a question, I believe Senator Waters had a question about enforcement, and there was, I think Senator Birdsall also had questions. To be frank, with a ban, it's very difficult to enforce. I think the key with a ban is, as was mentioned, education, making sure that consumers are aware of the ban. It often helps to promote a recycling program if there's a ban and you can say, look, this is actually illegal to throw in the trash, but here's another option for you. So again, the second component of a ban is making sure that there's an alternative place for it to go.
But it does create a narrative for the people to be a
Correct.
little bit aware, and so maybe we can work on drop-offs from municipalities.
Correct, and I expect if this bill has legs and were to move forward, that DES would be focusing on education campaigns and providing educational materials for municipalities to be able to distribute, for solid waste facilities to be able to post and make available to the public. Again, DES is not taking a position on the bill. Again, we do support the general intent. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention is, again, if this bill has legs and does move forward, there are some definitions that have some minor typos that we would like the opportunity to make sure that those get corrected before it moves forward.
If you can draw those up and send them to the committee, we'd appreciate that.
I would be happy to do that.
Further questions? Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. So I'm curious in your position at DES, if I know that you have communications and sometimes collaborations with other states around these universal issues. Have you heard of any, and this might be a more appropriate question for one of the previous speakers, but it occurs to me that this is something that also needs to be addressed on the front end. And has there been any communications with any of the manufacturers about putting this information on the packaging, that this is a product that can't be disposed of in the trash? You know, I know that there are some products we buy, like there are certain light bulbs that tell you right on the packaging, like how you need to dispose of this. Has that communication happened? Have you heard about this?
That's a great question.
It seems like all the burden is on us on that back end.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's an important part of the whole question. I think you're onto something there. There has been discussion at a national level, not necessarily among New England states or like our counterparts in neighboring states, but at the EPA, there was actually some money appropriated for EPA to work on basically labeling protocols for lithium-ion batteries so that consumers have something to go by when they look at the packaging or when they look at the item itself. It will provide some instructions. So that's an ongoing effort that is happening at the national level. I'm not sure how long that'll take or what form that'll take, but that is something that is being considered for sure.
Thank you.
Senator Bertzel.
Thank you, and thank you for taking my question. Where do these lithium-ion batteries go if it's done appropriately? Who is capable of taking the lithium batteries, and how do you deal with them?
Good question. I'm not clear on all the details. I know that Call2Recycle's collection program consolidates batteries nationwide, and I believe they have several facilities throughout the United States, or at least North America, that take these batteries, they break them down, and they essentially try to recycle the components that they can. So I don't know exactly what happens to them, but they're essentially collected at large facilities that consolidate batteries and process them.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Reagan Bissonette from NRRA, which means...
National Recyclers Recovery Association.
Thank you. I got the name right?
Yes, Reagan Bissonette. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am with the Northeast Resource Recovery Association. We are a recycling nonprofit, and we work with 90% of the communities in New Hampshire to help them manage their recycling programs. So our organization does not take a position on legislation as a matter of policy, so we don't take a position on this bill, but I did want to share some of the experiences that we have and that our municipal members have regarding lithium-ion batteries and electronics recycling. I'm also a member of the Solid Waste Working Group that Representative Ebel chairs. So you've already heard from prior speakers about the dangers of lithium-ion batteries, so I'm not going to rehash that. We are certainly seeing an increasing number of lithium-ion battery fires at municipal transfer stations. I'll give a few examples of those. So the city of Keene a few years ago had a fire at their transfer station that was suspected to possibly be caused by a lithium-ion battery. Of course, sometimes you're not able to be sure, but in that case, a firefighter was injured dealing with that fire, and there was also a substantial amount of damage at the facility. In May of 2022, the town of Lee also experienced a lithium-ion battery fire. It was confirmed to be a lithium-ion battery. A resident had disposed of it in their trash, and while they were using equipment to move the trash at the facility, their trash caught fire. And the staff fortunately had training and were able to quickly get that fire outside of the building by using a piece of equipment and put it out. So they didn't have any damage or injuries in that case, but it was really due to the training of the staff to quickly be able to address that. In addition, last year, Bartlett, New Hampshire had a fire that was caused by an electronic bike battery. We are increasingly seeing that electronic bikes, they do have lithium-ion batteries, and sometimes those can catch fire when improperly disposed of. So this is definitely an issue that is impacting our municipalities. One thing I wanted to share is that our organization actively works with towns and cities in New Hampshire to help them recycle their electronics. So we actually connect municipalities to the companies that will then recycle material, and that includes batteries and electronics. So I can tell you, I don't have specific data, but I can tell you that many, many transfer stations at the municipal level already collect and recycle batteries for their residents. So that is a common service. And there are a number of electronics and battery recycling companies that serve New Hampshire. And so there are opportunities for communities to already be safely recycling those batteries. I'll also speak to education. Education is definitely a really key piece of this because of just how common lithium-ion batteries are, how they're really showing up in so many different areas where residents just don't know. One of the things we've done as an organization is provide educational materials both for the municipal staff who are managing transfer stations, and then also for them to turn around and share that with their residents. So we have a battery recycling toolkit on our website. We have put together a poster that municipalities can print and put at their transfer station that explains the different kinds of batteries in as simple a way as possible so that residents can better understand when something needs to be safely recycled and when something maybe can be safely put in the trash. Ideally, all batteries are recycled, but in many cases, single-use batteries are commonly disposed of by many municipalities. So there's a lot of confusion for residents, and it is something that we really need to continue to work on.
Well done.
Yes.
Well done. So my question is, when these batteries go to your recycling plant, will this bill prohibit you from any waste that you produce?
Can you clarify what you mean by that question?
So these batteries go to your recycling plant. Is there any type of disposal that you'll still have because of the whole process of recycling? Will there be waste that would be considered toxic?
Well, just to clarify, so our nonprofit doesn't own any physical facilities beyond our office building, so we're really handling the logistics of connecting a municipality with the company that actually does the recycling. So the companies that are already established that recycle batteries and electronics, they already have methods in place to make sure that they're safely handling whatever toxic material might be in those batteries.
Perfect. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, well done.
Thank you.
And we have the Municipal Association, Nate. Is that, you're with?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Senator. Nate Grace, the Municipal Association. We support this legislation. As you've heard extensively this morning, these types of batteries are a serious fire risk, and they are a fire risk at municipal facilities. I'm here really to speak about the value proposition of doing this. Obviously, replacing the facilities is very expensive. Getting firefighters called out to battle these fires is costly. Oftentimes, there are additional toxins with these types of fires, and so you see more frequent replacement of firefighting equipment. So in terms of the actual costs here, it really does make sense from the municipal perspective to work with entities that are capable of facilitating proper recycling of these, work with DES for additional education, and go from there. Happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Appreciate you coming up and testifying. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none?
Thank you.
Did a good job. And seeing how nobody else wants to testify on this, we will close the hearing. Oh, did you want to speak? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did sign in support for Casella, but I did want to just take a moment to say that this is a bill that it appears all of the landfills across the state are supportive of. And you've heard some excellent testimony of why this is important, but I do want to just emphasize that this education that comes from these bills is critical. And we have a history in this state where our citizens are receptive and responsive to these kind of laws. We've seen it with electronic devices, but I want to share with you, because some of you were involved in this a decade ago, and while it's a little bit different, it has the same impact, and that is the proper disposal of pharmaceutical and over-the-counter drugs. And if you remember, the state passed similar legislation to encourage our citizens to properly dispose of drugs. They were either putting them in their garbage or they were flushing them down the toilets, and DES played a very active role in coordinating education that took place. Our citizens now are very serious when it comes to the disposal of those kind of things. We've seen law enforcement, as you know, host take-back programs. Retailers have done take-back programs. We have drop boxes that have developed in police stations, hospitals, all across the state. People, as they become educated, have become extremely responsive. And I do believe that that same kind of situation will develop from this bill. So on behalf of Casella and others, we do support this legislation.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. And we'll close the hearing on that, and we'll open up 1687 FN. We're going to have my vice chair. That real quick. Take my lithium battery out of here.
1687?
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I have 8 copies of this, one each for the committee, the file, the researcher, and an extra if you need it. Okay. All right. Yours? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee correct, Energy and Natural Resources Committee. For the record, I'm State Representative John Cloutier, representing Sullivan County District 6, which comprises the communities of Croydon and Claremont. And I'm here today in strong support of House Bill 1687 as amended and recommended by a unanimous majority of the House Environment and Agriculture Committee. I believe this bill as amended would more clearly define the disposal of hazardous waste and materials as described in RSA 147-B:2, Part 8, and RSA 147, Part B, (2) 7. It is relative only to the disposal of hazardous waste and materials from state construction and New Hampshire University system construction projects. In other words, the committee amendment strengthens state contractual positions and will improve compliance with regard to the disposal of construction and demolition debris from state construction projects as quoted in the committee's report on House Bill 1687 as amended in the March 1st, 2024 House calendar. Furthermore, I believe if House Bill 1687 as amended becomes law, I believe it would set a good example for New Hampshire's political subdivisions, our counties, municipalities, and school districts, and how to handle the separation of hazardous waste more safely from their construction and demolition, from the construction and demolition debris generated by their construction projects. In setting a good example, our state government could share its best practices in this type of waste handling so as to protect our precious environment as well as reduce cost. Finally, I believe if this bill becomes law, the state could also should also share these safe separation policies with private businesses and nonprofits, so as to encourage both to do a better job in separating such waste from C and D debris. So this would be voluntary. It would only apply to basically state construction projects for our subdivisions and private sector. It would just hopefully encourage them to do the right thing. Frankly, I was inspired to introduce House Bill 1687 because of a potential environmental threat in my home community of Claremont, a potential threat generated by a private waste handling company, Acuity Management, would want permission from the city of Claremont to change the type of recycling materials that its Claremont site can accept. A site close to many homes, businesses, an Amtrak train station, and an elementary school. And we're talking about 1 or 2 miles. Permission that so far has been denied by the Claremont Zoning Board of Adjustment. This denial is now the subject of a lawsuit against the city by Acuity. I'm concerned if the city were to lose this lawsuit, there is likely no protection from the possible environment and health dangers of unseparated hazardous waste mixed in with construction and demolition debris. Waste that would be trucked into Acuity's Claremont site with as many, and this is really shocking, I still can't believe it, as many 80 daily trucks entering the site according to my information, which would also be bad on our roads, but that's another subject. I believe if House Bill 1687 as currently amended becomes law, Claremont at least would have some protections from unseparated hazardous waste from state construction projects. In conclusion, I'm more than happy to work with this committee to improve the language of this bill by amendment if you determine such improvement is necessary. And I've worked with the Environment and Agriculture Committee to amend the bill at the request of DES, by the way. But ultimately, I would urge all of you to give a positive recommendation to House Bill 1687 in some form. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Oh, Senator Waters.
Thank you. So, thank you, Representative. So just to confirm that the bill has no requirement that the state share its contracting language.
It has no requirement, but that would be, I think, the intent that, you know, if they're doing, and this would, as I said, apply to our state construction projects, that it would share this information with our political subdivisions and the private sector, so as and to encourage them to do the right thing in separating the hazardous waste from C and D debris. So that's my intent, because also we can't mandate any because of the state unfunded mandate on municipalities to, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I believe we would have real problems if we mandated such a policy on political subdivision. The private sector, that's an issue maybe for the future, but I think right now start small and see where we go.
And if I may follow up, and just again to clarify that this bill, in fact, would potentially not affect the Acuity situation at all unless, let me finish.
Okay,
unless,
sure, I'm sorry.
It was a state construction project that was going to use that Claremont site for its debris.
Right, that is correct.
Thank
It
you.
would just affect the state construction debris.
Thank you. Okay.
Senator Birdsall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
What types of hazardous materials are we talking about?
Well, I'm not, things like mercury, PFAS, I'll admit I have a hard time with that term. I mean, anything, if you, as I said, I'm concerned that are a threat to human health, and it's not, I think, elaborate in the bill, but there may be other statutes, and as I said, I'd be happy to work with the amendment if you want to amend it to include a list of such substances.
So are some of the commercial constructions use the same materials?
I am not. I've heard stories that they do. That those hazardous materials from are mixed in, and some private entities may do the right thing, but others don't necessarily do the right thing. And plus the fact that some of this waste is going to be coming, I think, from other states. So I don't know what the laws and regulations are in other states as well as our own. But I'm talking about, and as I said, I've heard as many as 80 trucks daily. If this were, the Acuity wins this lawsuit and was able to do what it is able to do.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator.
Just one more question I have.
Sure,
Is
Senator
there any
Purple.
projection as to like an increase in cost to on these projects for complying with what this bill would require?
This, you mean impact on state construction projects? I don't honestly know what impacts, their financial impacts would be. I suppose that's something, I don't know, this committee could research, but I think we need to do the right thing when it comes to our environment and our citizens' health and safety and the workers who handle such waste. I think it's worth, I'm not even sure whether it'd be a increased cost, but what about, and also there's the cost if they get sick and they're on a state, could the state be liable for any illnesses if it could be proven? That's, so that may actually reduce such costs if we do the right thing.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you.
Okay.
Just remind you to
All right.
sign in on the sheet, please, before you.
Okay, yeah, I will sign it. I thought you were going to have another hearing before this hearing.
Thank
So
you.
that's right. Thank you very much for listening to me, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Senators. Actually, what I'll do, based on Senator Birdsell's question, pass out the statutes that it's referencing. Now, the copy is not a position paper, it's more of the bill.
And if you can introduce yourself.
Excuse me?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you very much, Senator. For the record, my name's Gary Abbott. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Associated General Contractors of New Hampshire. What you're given is the bill, which you can skip, but then I printed out the statutes and highlighted the statutes, what it affects. And I wasn't originally going to testify, but I just want to make sure. There's been a lot of discussion about this bill, and I brought it up to the contractors for what do you have to do differently than you do today? And the answer is nothing. What this bill does is it mandates the state agencies put language in their contracts that highlight these hazardous waste statutes that are already in effect. So we already have to comply with these regulations and hazards. Nobody wants asbestos, lead paint. Those all have to be remediated, and we've been doing this for years. So this bill basically just says, it's a goodwill bill that says, let's remind people that you have to do this. For me, it's somewhat of a slippery slope because are you going to put all the environmental statutes in a public contract? In the future, these have been in place a long time. But because it doesn't do anything as far as we're concerned of what we have to do. There's a lot talked about construction and demolition debris. The last page has the definition of that. We do not make any changes to that. Right now, it's in the interest of contractors and whoever they're recycling those materials to. They will have a dumpster for bricks, because you can reuse bricks, and it costs less you don't want to put them in a landfill if you can reuse them. You're going to put some lumber, wallboard in another dumpster, but it's not necessarily separated, because my contractors immediately went to me in the original bill and said, what do we have to separate? What's different? To me, there's nothing different. The fear is that hazardous materials gets in those dumpsters. And trust me, you don't want to be a contractor that has hazardous materials in any of those dumpsters, because you become responsible and liable big time. So I even have subcontractors who handle asbestos. Those are teams that go in before the project is demoed. So you have to test for those things. It's already taken care of. So I don't want any the biggest concern to me is when you write this into the statutes as a separate thing, and then those environmental statutes change, will we remember or know the connection for whatever changes in the future? It is limited to state projects because that's who does state contracts. Private contractors are privately, and you really can't mandate those things. So I just wanted to be clear. I didn't check off support or oppose, because in our opinion, and I just wanted this to be on the record, that it just basically is saying make sure you follow these things. But from a technical, in the field, I don't see any difference in how we're already doing construction debris and making sure, because you do have hazards. You have liquid hazards, you know, oil, barrels, whatever you might find on a site, but you have to handle those differently as hazardous materials under those other statutes. So I just wanted to make that clarification for you, that that's really what this bill does, and I would leave it up to you guys whether you want to pass it or not. I don't think it, the scenario that you were given by the sponsor, I don't think it has any effect on future companies that want to sort construction debris, because some of our facilities do that already. There's no doubt they're sorting. If there's copper pipes in there, they're taking that out of there. They're valuable. Other companies that can look at, they want to take the steel or something else and put it on trains and make money. That's part of our economic system. So I'm not so sure it stops a recycling facility using construction debris. I'm not so sure it does that. I think that's the NIMBY of fighting a new facility that might come in, that you would use the hazardous materials as a thing, but I think there's a lot of construction debris that could be separated and could be cost effective for those that do that.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committees? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Gary, for coming in. So I asked the bill sponsor a question about financial impact, but if I'm understanding what you're saying, that this really doesn't change anything, it doesn't really make any difference in the requirements that are currently in place, so you wouldn't anticipate a financial impact?
I wouldn't anticipate anything changing at the moment, because that's exactly what the contractors kept coming to me and saying, what are we asking to do? And we're not being asked to do anything differently, because we're not allowed right now to put hazardous into those containers.
All right, thank you, Gary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for taking my question. So thank you for providing the copy of this statute. That's enormously helpful. And I wonder if I'm reading this a little bit differently in Part 3 of the bill as amended by the House on line 8 and 9. Well, actually, just the whole paragraph. The contract shall include a requirement that all hazardous material, as defined in the statute you brought us, which is great, and hazardous waste, as defined in here, be separated from construction and demolition debris at the construction site prior to transport. So, would this bill not be a belt and suspenders for if you are taking these measures? Does it not help to have this statute to compel for when other people start participating in contracts that, you know, just a very old-fashioned belt and suspenders approach to disposing of hazardous waste and putting in statute that it has to be done in this space before you truck it off and get it mixed up all over?
I'm going to try to interpret your question, because right now our definition is those materials are handled separately. The issue for me is like hiring. We have a company that does asbestos remediation, goes in, and they have to follow all the rules of how to bag it up and how to contain and put plastic. Their shipping and separation, would this statute become confusing for them of what their procedure currently is, because they have to ship it off and dispose it? They're not mixing it in with the other construction debris. So on one hand, I'm saying it's fine to put it in the contract and say, these statutes are in place, make sure you follow them. I think that's your question. But I also know hazardous materials each have to be handled differently. Contaminated soil, oil in the soil for my highway contractors that run into contaminated soil, that has to be disposed in a certain, there's no real way to separate that soil from the oil. And so I've been very cautious at how that's going to be interpreted separation, and hauling. So it's much more complicated than you think because each material is unique and different in what you have to do to remediate it or remove it. Some items have to stay on the site, so, you know, you just have to be knowledgeable of the expanse of this. But we're not here to say we object that it be written into the contract. It just, you start putting in statutes and contracts, and then statutes change. There could be issues later.
Can I follow up? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for introducing some of the complexity. Appreciate that. I think I'm reading this bit here, and we have already, and it, as you said, your organization's members are already following Chapter 147B, and by the definitions which are reflected here in the proposed House Bill 1687. So they are using these definitions of hazardous waste from 147, and what the bill's sponsor is asking is that those things that we're already recognizing as hazardous, and your example, asbestos, and other example, lead, when you're at a construction site, or contaminated soil, the ask is that it be separated and contained, I guess, prior to moving off location to another location. And are you saying that based on 147, you already do that? Or do are there some times when that transport from construction site to disposal site happens in a different place, that sorting?
I think those hazardous.
That's the part I'm trying to.
I think those hazardous materials are already separated.
On site.
On site.
On site. Okay, so this really is the suspenders to the belt that we have. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for going through the weeds with me there. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chairman, and thanks, Gary. And just to follow up on that, thinking about when we've had some discussions about things that are sent to out-of-state facilities that specialize in this kind of work, is there enough clarity in the materials that actually physically could be separated at the site rather than those that have to be sent to a special facilities to separate them out? You mentioned the soils, but aren't there other things as well?
I guess I looked at the bigger question.
Yeah.
Separation of construction debris there's two, like I recognize like bricks going into one and not into another, but a contractor, those are not hazardous. They could be commingled and let the sorting facility handle it for you versus the contractor do it on site. In my opinion, this bill doesn't address that issue of the sorting of 149, which is the definition in the back of the thing, because those are non-hazardous. That could still take place, and I think the only part of this bill that was confusing was the definition of construction debris sorted ahead of time. I wanted to make sure that it's only regarding the hazardous that has to be separated currently. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to open up the hearing to 1620 FN, and we're going to hear from the prime sponsor, who looks good on TV. Saw you this weekend. I said, I know that guy. I'm going to get his autograph. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you. I tried to give my kids my autograph. They weren't all that interested, so
I get that a lot,
I have
too.
fans somewhere. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is David Rochefort. I represent Grafton 1, which is Littleton, Lisbon, Lyman, Bath, Monroe, and Sugar Hill. And at least for 24 hours, we have spring up there in the North Country. I don't know what it's going to be like tomorrow, but here to introduce the bill, House Bill 1620. And just to give a little background where 1620, of course, the chairman knows this because we served together over the summer on the study committee that resulted out of Senate Bill 159. And this was the committee to study unlimited service area permits for landfills and out-of-state waste coming into New Hampshire. And the committee came up with 6 recommendations. And recommendation number 5 was the committee recommends that a moratorium be considered against the construction of new landfills. Now, I want to dive into that a little bit. I know the chairman here was on that committee. He didn't recommend that a moratorium be implemented, but at least we came to a decision or an agreement with the 4 of us that we would consider it. So here we are today, considering it. So that's where it comes about. And really the genesis of this of this discussion came about where, the committee looked at the fact that, we've got a lot of trash coming into the state from out of state. About 50% of the trash that we're putting into our ground comes from out of state. There's been a number of proposals on both the House side and the Senate side over the last several years and how we deal with that. And the genesis behind this bill was, hey, until we come up with a solid agreement that can be agreed on both the House and the Senate in the corner office, let's pump the brakes on this. The reality is we don't need another landfill for at least 10 years. So this bill would pump the brakes till 2028. It would allow certain things to continue to go on that are going on now, including rewriting the rules associated with landfills and permitting landfills. We heard earlier today about considering a change in the permitting process to have a initial screening before we go on to the final. You were going to be hearing later this session on specifically limiting out-of-state trash to a certain percentage. And those are all things that will have to be considered by both sides of the legislature, as well likely end up in court. That there will be some challenges, I think, regardless of what we do here, that will be settled or delineated by the court. So that's the background behind this. Now, since I initially introduced this bill, something came to light. And that's the Waste Management Council. And I think, which I think the role that the Waste Management Council plays and the current status that the Waste Management Council is in really gives credence to the value of pumping the brakes on any moratorium. I'd like to point out, New Hampshire will need 1 landfill in the next 100 years. That's about what we're going to need. So the idea is, hey, if we're going to do this, let's do it right and make sure that we're taking things all into consideration that we can. Now, that brings me back to the Waste Management Council. RSA 21:0:9 establishes the Waste Management Council, and the council shall consult with and advise the director of the Division of Waste Management with respect to the policy, programs, goals, and operations of the division regarding its solid and hazardous waste management functions and responsibilities, with particular emphasis on long-range planning for the division regarding solid and hazardous waste management and on education of the public. Roman numeral 6 says the director of waste management shall present all rules proposed to be implemented by the division. So we know we have rules right now that are in process. I know there's some folks from a subcommittee that's overseeing that. So the director shall present all the rules that are proposed by the division to the Waste Management Council for consideration prior to filing a notice of proposed rule under RSA 541A. That's great. We have checks and balances built into our system to ensure that we're getting the right counsel as we implement these rules. The problem is 40% of this 38 and change percent of the seats on that council are empty right now. So think about that. 40% of the seats that are designed to be consulting with the Department of Environmental Science on these rules are empty. Think about what would happen here in this committee. If 40% of the committee was gone and you have 60% here to make all the decisions and all the consideration. Or,
right along.
Or we had 40% on this side of the room gone and we had these folks to make the decisions. So I mean, it just gives more credence and to value the fact that we pump the brakes, we fill our seats in the Waste Management Council with the qualified individuals that are supposed to be there, and we go about doing this right. Again, one thing that came up in our committee was that we're in no imminent need for capacity in the state of New Hampshire, and if we're going to do this, if we're going to put garbage in our ground, if we're going to potentially risk clean water, let's go low and slow and do it right. So that's the background of the bill. Pretty simple. I would be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you for your testimony, for bringing the bill up, and it was fun working with you, and very enlightening, obviously, in the committee. And I think one of the things I also took away from that committee was the fact that we could reduce the tonnage by 2/3 if we incinerate. So you either incinerate it or you put it in the ground. And if you put it in the ground, you put the water at risk, or potentially if there's a leak and such not. But if you incinerate, obviously you have air situations. But there are scrubbers, and you can deal with that in a meaningful way. But by reducing the tonnage, I'd like a little more talk about that in the future, because and we can also generate power with that if you incinerate. And there are other things that came along with that. But anyway, those are suggestions that we came up with that I think were very valuable.
And just on the point of that, you're absolutely right. We talked about incineration, and I think that there was a lot of interest in that. I know, speaking to my colleagues in the House, there's a lot of interest. Hey, why don't you do this? Why aren't we burning this? And I know, the thought of incineration 20 years ago is much different than again, technology advances is different than it is now. And again, another reason why maybe pumping the brakes here, putting this pause in issuing new landfill permits, could give us time to consider that. So when we do have time. We have the benefit of time, and we can consider that. I know another discussion was talking about clean water, and are there other sources of clean water that we are desalination or whatnot that we could be considering as well. This would give us the opportunity to say we're not going to jump into the ground with our trash. We're not going to jump off this cliff. We have the time. We have the capacity. Let's look at those things, because those are things that people are interested in, and thinking old school. We know that that's not always better. So
right. Well, we're young, so we can think new school, right?
That sounds good.
Questions from the committee. Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. So today's trash day. We're talking this is Oscar the Grouch's favorite day. And it seems like this bill it looks like it would dovetail well with House Bill 602. Was there any collaboration, or just?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think in if I may.
Yeah, please.
We've sent over a number of trash bills. So I know today's trash day. We've got more coming for you. So we're giving the Senate, I think, a lot of options to work with, and I think that there's some genuine interest on both sides of the aisle, both houses, to do something. And this is one of the tools that we've given you. But this. We could implement this bill now, 1620, pump the brakes, and let's work through some of those other things, whether it be incineration or the 602 with the new application process and whatnot. I think it fits hand in glove with a lot of the other things that we've got coming.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, well done.
Great, thank you.
Amy asked to come to be put up to the front line. She got an appointment that you got to go to, so we're going to respect that and ask you to come in and share what you have for the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I really appreciate that. Thank you, Chairman Avard. I really appreciate that. As I mentioned, I have a urgent personal thing that has come up with my mom. And in fact, I realized how distracted I am by that because I checked opposed in the bill. And in fact, I am here to speak on behalf of my client, the North Country Alliance for Balance Change, in strong support of House Bill 1620. So if you just want to mark that correctly for me in the record. As I mentioned, my name is Amy Manzelli. I'm a lawyer from BCM Environmental and Land Law, here to testify in support of HB 1620. And I just want to preemptively address 3 legal points, which I think are going to come up over the course of this bill. First, moratoria are legal, constitutional tools. I took a quick skim through the past 23 years of legislation, and I found a handful of moratoria enacted in New Hampshire since 2000, and I took made a little chart of those for you. I'm not going to read through all of them. The point is, moratoria happen. They're legal. They're constitutional. I was reminded, interestingly, in fact, in 2005 and 2006, first, just like this topic, there was a study commission, and then there was the moratorium on incineration of construction and demolition debris. So a solid waste topic resulting in a moratorium for exactly the same reason. Pumping the brakes while everything was figured out. So point number 1, moratoria happen, they're legal, they're constitutional, and this gives you a demonstrated history of them happening here in the Granite State. Point number 2, we already have important, well-settled common law that when you are enacting new law, regulations, or statutes, both of which could happen while a moratorium is enacted, and those changes in law are to protect the public welfare, there's no grandfathering. So we have this New Hampshire Supreme Court case called Fisher v. New Hampshire State Building Code Review. It's from 2006. I didn't print out cases for everybody and the committee, but if you would like copies, I'd be happy to email those in. Important sections from this case, quote, "There is no such thing as an inherent or vested right to imperil the health or impair the safety of the community." So when you're changing the law to protect the community, that's not a vested right to continue to imperil the community. It goes on to say, quote, "It would be a sad commentary on the law if lawmakers were powerless to compel the adoption of the best methods for protecting life in such cases simply because the confessedly faulty method in use was the method provided by law at the time of its construction." So if a moratorium is enacted and then the statutes or the regulations are updated, there's no right to have those not apply. And that segues into my third point, which is we already have a very analogous precedent of new, more protective laws applying in a large project context, such as what would be a new application for a landfill or a pending application for a landfill. So many of you might have been familiar with the Northern Pass proposal. This was an overhead transmission line that was proposed in 2015. Specifically, that was proposed in September of 2015, after the Northern Pass project team had worked on that project for several years. Just like a landfill project team would work on that project for several years before actually filing the applications. In the Northern Pass project, after filing the formal application process in September of 2015, the Site Evaluation Committee changed their rules entirely, complete overhaul, and those rules were made much stricter in December 15th, 2015. In January, the next January, 1 month later, the Northern Pass submitted a letter to the record of the Site Evaluation Committee acknowledging it would comply with those rules. It was not a disputed matter. They simply understood that common law that I talked about, that when you are changing the rules to improve public health and safety and welfare, pending applications have to comply with those. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to bring to the committee. I, again, on a personal level, really appreciate you expediting my testimony. I welcome any questions.
Well, I have a question. Because we talked about incineration, and you have these highlighted. Are they still in the moratorium? Since 2006 and 2005?
I don't have the answer for you. I didn't study the content of these moratorium bills. It was just the point that moratoria are used as a tool. I'd be happy to follow up on email if that's an important question for you.
Yeah, if the moratorium is like really a permanent type of thing.
Sure.
You know. So questions from the committee?
If I may.
Oh,
Yep. Yeah.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to go over, thanks for being here, and thanks, I'd like to go over the 3 points that you made. The moratoria are legal, I see the list. Doesn't the question become, at one point, does a moratorium affect something that is under ongoing consideration? And whether or not, as I think the Commissioner of DES believes that, I won't speak for him, but the potential is that this bill would create legal lawsuits because of the status of, the project up north. Isn't that the case?
Yeah, I think you're referencing the Granite State landfill application and a concern that that project would be suing. I don't think that that's a founded concern because of the well-settled New Hampshire law that there is no vested right to be allowed to continue a practice that would imperil public health and safety. So let's say, for example, one of the rule updates was that you had to use the newly formatted form. It was just purely a ministerial update. I think there'd be a great argument that you were grandfathered from not having to use the new form. But let's say, for example, another update was that transmissivity of soil to protect groundwater resources for public health purposes had become more strict. I think that that would not be grandfathered because the purpose of that update was to protect public health.
Yeah, if I may follow up. So I was going to get to that, your second point, because might it not be said that your reference there to public health and the threat to it, two things. One, that the language of the bill doesn't mention that. And then secondly, that the question of whether or not DES procedures on these sightings already cover or present a process over which those things would be evaluated, so that even if there was a particular change as to, what might be looked at, that in itself would certainly be fine, but it wouldn't be a question of a moratoria at that point. It would be just a criteria that the usual DES process would now ask a developer to do. So I think it's more to the first point that I do not see in the language of the bill something that qualifies as a justification for the moratorium that you presented.
I don't have a printout of the 1620 as amended in front of me, but I do believe, I could be mistaken, but I do believe that it references as one of the justifications an update to the rules. Does it not?
It says, if I may
Yeah,
read
you
it,
may,
Mr.
of course.
Chairman. In order to ensure that any landfills are sited properly, meet the need of public benefit, and are aligned with New Hampshire solid waste goals. So I think cited properly, public benefit and solid waste goals are not ones that, to me, trip the concern about immediate threat to the public health, which you mentioned as a justification for a moratorium. I mean, not that I'm against the bill, but you see what I'm saying is that I'm not sure that the language here for the kind of moratorium that the bill proposes justifies it.
The citing criteria in the statute are largely driven by public health criteria. So when you look at section 1 of the statute, the purposes are to protect human health and natural resources. And so all of the citing criteria have to sort of be the fruit of that tree.
If I may, I get that. But wouldn't you have to demonstrate that the existing process at DES was inadequate to deal with those things? And wouldn't that be something that would be subject to civil litigation?
It's possible. It's possible, and I'm not the technical expert here for NCABC. I know Muriel Robinette would be testifying later. I have a layperson understanding that many landfills have releases of contaminants, so I do think that it's fair to assert that there is widespread failure at landfills. So I'm not sure the regulatory process is functional at this point, and I believe that the current update process of the administrative rules is looking to tighten some of that up.
And just my last one, on your third point about Northern Pass, I mean, sure, we sometimes change the rules in midstream, but there was never a moratorium on Northern Pass, right? It went through the process. The SEC denied the permit, but there was not a moratorium of that process.
I wasn't claiming that there was. There was I don't know the answer to that, but I'm not claiming that there was. Yeah, the illustration there was that when you change the rules in the middle of a large process, the new rules apply when they relate to public health.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, Rep. Potenza. Good morning and welcome to Energy and Natural Resources.
Thank you. Oops, glasses. So for the record, my name is Representative Kelly Potenza. I'm in Stratford District 19, Rochester Wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I didn't get 5. They redistrict. So I just wrote down my thoughts here because I want to make sure I get everything in. So from the time basically I was young, you know, I was told when things seem to be getting a little bit out of control or out of hand, you need to possibly change lanes to get on the right road, and or, you know, sometimes you want to grab the wheel, basically, you know, like a Velma and Louise scenario where we need to, you know, change course. And that's kind of what the situation that we're in for the last years here taking place in the state. I believe that people elected us to do just that, and there have been years of failure from the very people who were elected to do just that. HB 1620 is really a smart solution to a pause. That's it. It's a pause for 4 years to actually do the work to figure out the multitude of problems that New Hampshire is facing. So besides the fact that this pause has zero cost because we are in a period of no need, this is not kicking the can down the road. This is actually taking the time that we need to finally do the work the people of New Hampshire have been waiting for, and they've been waiting a long time. The people are counting on us to stop the noise and deliver real solutions to figure out the generational impacts of handling New Hampshire trash. I know this conversation has been going on for years, but I also know good legislation that has passed both bodies overwhelmingly was vetoed for no valid reasons. It sometimes takes fresh eyes and a resolve to do what is right for New Hampshire to get down to the truth about what is happening with our solid waste programs. I appreciate the study committee that was done. That was really good work, and there were many different pieces that came out of this. And of course, this is where one of the pieces of legislation are. So this small hiatus basically is to finally get the work done for New Hampshire citizens to figure out what is going wrong at NCS Bethlehem, to figure out how we can get closer to at least somewhat hitting our reduction goals, to implement new and developing trash elimination, possibly incineration technology, and modern recycling technology, to figure out how to deal with the forever chemicals, with PFAS, removing, storing them, isolating them from the leachate, putting New Hampshire citizens first by reducing out-of-state trash, putting our trash first, because that's how it's supposed to be. Figuring out how to remove more methane from landfill gas. I'm not sure if you've recently seen that report that came out, which I will send the whole committee, which was concerning. Writing siting rules that aren't 500 to 50,000 times weaker than other states. Finding a location for the next landfill that makes sense on good soil. And hopefully working on developing a public-private model, one statewide landfill to satisfy the New Hampshire need for the next 100 years. I think we've been wasting a lot of time since 2019 when a permit was put in place instead of, and that's a distraction. It's a distraction, of course, for people in legislature and of course, fighting on parties and lobbyists and everything that you can possibly imagine, than really doing what the people want. All I know is that I'm in Rochester and we have a landfill and we have issues there. But we are dealing with a company that lets us talk to them and come to the table and work on solutions, and they listen to the public. That's not been happening since 2019. And here we are, we're in the process of writing new rules at the same time where there's this looming application. And we're making things weaker. We're reverse engineering. And that's just, that's not what I was elected to do. I was elected to protect the health and well-being and balance industry at the same time. And we're not doing that. We're very distracted. And this bill is sensible. It's 4 years. We don't need another landfill if we do things right in our solid waste pyramid. So until 2034, possibly even later, and we could have one landfill that could satisfy us for the next century. I think it's smart, and I think people are ready for us to all come together and get it done for New Hampshire. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? No. All right, seeing none, appreciate it. Rep. Sullivan. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Jared Sullivan, Grafton 2, which includes the towns of Bethlehem and Franconia. And I'm here to speak to you today on the methodology and the fiscal impact. So there's just I'm an economist, so they kind of brought this to my attention. I'm not actually a sponsor on this bill, but when they asked me to kind of look at this because they're citing economic analysis in here that doesn't really stand up to some scrutiny. And so I think that you should be made aware of that as you go through your evaluation when you consider this for your ultimate recommendation. So they're talking about increases or potential increases in expenditures due to this bill. And they're saying that those increases are going to start in 2026. Well, that that's making an assumption that there's a causation of this bill leading to less capacity starting in 2026. That's just factually incorrect, because what they're assuming in that assumption is that the landfill in Bethlehem, which is my hometown, is going to shut down because of this bill, when in fact it's going to shut down regardless of this bill, because that landfill is cited to shut down in 2026, maybe 2027, depending on how much capacity they have. And to make the assumption in here that this is going to be an increase because of this bill is just false. Because I personally have spoken with Casella. They're obviously in my town, and I've met with them many times since I've started running for office and have been a representative. And they told me that even if the Dalton landfill, which is the big hot button issue at this time in this space, were to open up, there would still be a gap between the closure of the one in Bethlehem and the time it would take to actually build out the one in Dalton. So no matter what, regardless of this bill, there's going to be a decrease in supply, which is their whole justification for the increase in costs, starting in 2026, maybe 27, depending exactly on when the one in Bethlehem closes down. So for whoever did this fiscal analysis to sort of draw that conclusion that this bill is going to cause an increase in costs is false. It's either intentional misleading, or it's just not understanding of the situation that we're dealing with. Also, the idea that there is a increase because we're not building something right away, there's going to be an increase. It's sort of economics 101, where they're sort of suggesting that there's going to be a shift in the supply curve, if you will. If anybody who's taken an econ class, we all know how those supply and demand curves work. When you see a shift in the supply curve to the left, so a decrease in supply, you do see increases in quantities. But that's in a very simplistic model. That's the assumption that this is a closed system for a unique market. And I think that that's probably an overly simplistic analysis for this situation, given there are other landfills in the area. There are potential other ways to deal with garbage, including cutting out stuff from other parts of the country, other states. And also there's incineration, there's increased recycling rates. There's a lot of ways there's a lot of things that could actually decrease the demand or potentially increase supply that would negate any decrease in capacity that could occur from this moratorium. But again, I think that this methodology needs to be called out, that this methodology is not accurate. And that's my main point coming here to talk about this. So,
thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, we appreciate you coming in today.
Thanks.
Rep. Germana. Hopefully I got the last name right.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Representative Nick Germana, or Germana, either way, from Keene, Cheshire 1. And I wanted to say that the reason why Representative Rochefort looked so good on television this last weekend is by comparison because he was sitting next to me. So I'll take credit for that. I am on, and just came here, as did Representative Potenza, from the House Environment and Agriculture Subcommittee that is overseeing the writing of rules, the new rules for the Department of Environmental Studies regarding landfill siting. And my impression from that meeting that we had this morning is that there is a lot of work to be done. And there are a lot of really important questions that we need to have answered. One of them, for example, continues to be the question of simply how we are going to determine what an appropriate setback for a landfill is. Department of Environmental Services is at this point proposing continuing with a 30-year-old approach that puts that setback distance in terms of feet, even though we had testimony today from a hydrogeologist who said that, like most states, it makes most sense to determine that setback in terms of travel time of groundwater. And that's the way most states do it. So DES wants to continue with the 30-year-old model. It's very different from what other states have. And I use that as one example of where I feel, having followed this process very closely, we need to get this right. And there are a lot of really important questions we haven't answered yet. And a moratorium, when we're only talking about one landfill for the next century or so, is absolutely the right thing to do. What we should be talking about here is need, right? When we're talking about putting a landfill in New Hampshire, this should not be about whether or not a company can profit from it. I'm not opposed to, of course, I want businesses to be able to do well here in the state, but that shouldn't be the criterion that we use to determine whether or not a landfill should be put in the state. We should be talking about public health, and we should be talking about need. And over the next few years, I think I'm hopeful that there will be several things that we can do to address need. The very first thing in our solid waste triangle, as DES, our solid waste plan, is reduction. We're not doing very well at reduction. By the middle of this century, we're going to be more than 50% behind our waste reduction goals. We absolutely have to tackle that issue. And there are a number of ways that we're trying to do that. HB 1632 will be coming to you, another landfill bill that is to cap out-of-state waste at 15%. We're not going to be able to manage that issue of capacity and reduction of waste if we do not limit the amount of out-of-state trash. HB 1145 will also be coming to this committee, and that is for the public ownership of the land and the private operation of landfills. That would also allow us to reduce out-of-state waste. We've taken a step last year in the direction of composting, requiring people who are producing large amounts of food waste to find appropriate ways to dispose of food waste other than in landfills. That's about a quarter of what goes into our landfills is food waste. And then there's the development of new technologies that we're talking about. So over the next 4 or 5 years, there are technological developments. Incineration is another example of that. There are other efforts to reduce the amount of waste that we're putting in landfills, and it is not worth rushing citing, allowing another landfill to be cited when we don't need it simply because one particular company can make a profit on it. I'd like to also emphasize that this is a bipartisan collaboration. The testimony that you are all hearing today is very bipartisan. Our study committee was very bipartisan. This bill remarkably came out of Environment and Agriculture Committee 20-0 and went on consent and passed through the House on consent. So I think that speaks to just how deeply there is a bipartisan commitment to addressing these issues. We also had another bill that came out 20-0 that you'll be looking at. So I think that's a really good indication that this is genuinely representative of what Granite Staters all across the state want. So I strongly encourage you to recommend OTP to the full body.
Thank you for your testimony. It was nice working with you in the study committee, and I think very eye-opening. Are there any questions from the committee? No. Well done.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, I think I got Michael Willett written down here twice. You want to speak twice?
Michael Wright?
Michael Wright?
Yeah. He's here.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, I got you down here twice. So you want to stand up and sit down again? That's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Sit there. Okay, thanks. My apologies. I'm dealing with a terrible head cold, so I didn't even hear you speak my name back there. My name is Michael Wright. I reside up in Littleton, and I'm here to speak in support of HB 1620. I do have a testimony here that I will submit to the committee. I haven't done so yet, but I will do that after the meeting. And I don't think it's necessary for me to go through the entire testimony because there's been a lot of salient points that have already been covered. But let me cover some of them. So every so often, a piece of legislation comes around with only benefits and no costs whatsoever. However, that's not going to stop a few special interests from claiming that a 4-year pause on a new landfill siting will be harmful. But I hope during this testimony I can make it clear that any such claims should be ignored. The most basic and indisputable fact, which we've heard already, and this comes directly from the DES, is that New Hampshire currently has far more capacity than needed to bury every ton of waste we generate. And this will be true at least up until the end of 2034, and almost certainly for decades beyond that. Even if we utterly fail, which it sounds like we're not meeting our waste reduction goals, but if we fail our waste reduction goals, we generate in New Hampshire no more than 1.1 million tons of solid waste per year. Now, the DES has already permitted Waste Management Landfill in Rochester to accept 1.4 million tons of waste per year, and Mount Carberry Landfill is permitted to accept about 200,000 tons. And that's with the most recent extension that runs through 2041. Both landfills have an absolute requirement, and this is in our regulations, in their permits, that the permit shall make available disposal capacity for New Hampshire-generated solid waste for the entire operating life of the facility. So in collection there, that's 1.6 million tons that are currently available. 1.1 million tons at most are needed. So do the math, we have an extra 500,000 million tons of capacity out there. Like it or not, New Hampshire law unequivocally states that a new landfill cannot be built unless there is a capacity shortfall. Therefore, this 4-year moratorium or pause, HB 1620, will entirely occur during the period of time when there is no shortfall or need. The sponsors originally, you may know, had requested a pause up until 2031 on the grounds that it could possibly take more than 3 years to build a landfill. And this assumed that during the pause that the DS would work on any permit application and then grant the permit. But the sponsors did change this, as you know, and they changed the date to 2028, which allows basically a leisurely 6 years from the end of the pause for the next landfill to be built. Even assuming that the turnkey landfill doesn't seek to obtain an anticipated next extension before 2034. And the most fundamental fact about the economics, and we heard a representative speaking about this, is the economics of waste. Operators are not and will not change the customers or charge the customers more because they have not quite much extra capacity as before. Instead of lots of extra capacity, the capacity doesn't change the price. We have no idea what the price will go up and down for the next few years based on the factors like the price of gasoline and the cost of labor. But we know that not building an unneeded landfill too early will not cause prices to rise. So not building this landfill, as Casella Waste is looking to do here immediately, is not going to cause the price of landfilling to rise. So let's be honest, a brief delay in starting to earn money from its next landfill will not annoy Casella Waste Systems just because they're focused on short-term profits and their stock price. Let me skip over that. So what are the benefits of a 4-year pause? There are many. They are substantial and they are obvious. The obvious benefit for all of us is that being able to finally concentrate on improving state policy rather than constantly deliberating or feuding over one application and filing the same bills year after year. This current application has really just sucked the oxygen out of the room here when it comes to really making good decisions for our waste challenges here in New Hampshire. So I just want to run over quickly 6 points. We know that at least 6 important conversations for all stakeholders could happen during the next 4 years. These are hard and needed work during this time of excess capacity. We can work together to solve the out-of-state trash problem. I would submit that the landfill space is far worse than wasted space. It serves as a giant magnet for out-of-state trash. And we have all this capacity out there, this feeling from Casella, which if they build it, trash will come. I think it more should be appropriately called the Bay State magnet, as the company estimates it will take 49% of its waste from out of state. A pause will give New Hampshire time to explore developing a publicly owned landfill, which by law is the only type of facility in which we can declare our independence from other states and decide how much out-of-state trash we're willing to work with. We can work together to find a better location for New Hampshire's next landfill. the current one is kind of irrationally a remote location when you think about where most of the landfill trash is actually developed in this state. So, there's vast amounts of other tracks that are possible. It'll give us time to actually take a look at what might be an appropriate site, and especially not one that's in a sand and gravel aquifer, which is just a very porous aquifer. We can work together to produce DES landfill siting rules that are not rushed into being an embarrassingly weak. Now, let me explain this, and it's no fault of their own, but the New Hampshire DES is faced with having to do two, generational types of projects at the exact same time: revise the landfill siting and operation regulations, and review and decide on the only new landfill application in decades. Unfortunately, DES has been unable to separate what are mutually exclusive but vital essential tasks. We have a DES that now clearly knows exactly how to write specifications into new rules that are tailor-made to allow the Casella project to pass the new tests it is creating. A pause will allow DES to write the rules based on science, economics, and public protection without the distraction of an active application in front of people. Now, my comment is not to imply there's any wrongdoing or misconduct, but the pressure to say yes to the Casella application is unduly influencing critical waste management policy. We just need to pause. We can work together to explore ways to reduce landfill methane emissions. Somebody mentioned that earlier. There's a new publication in the Journal of Science that demonstrates landfills in the U.S. release 3 times what they thought before of methane. And lastly, we can work together to help DES figure out what is going wrong and amiss at the active Casella landfill in Bethlehem, which is clearly leaking PFAS and other toxic substance into the Ammonoosuc River. Casella has resisted all requests to hire an independent contractor to study the leaks, so now is not the time to rush into building another PFAS factory before we learn how the other previous one failed. And that's the end of my comments, and I will take questions if anybody has them.
Thank you for your comments, and questions from the committee.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And seeing how turnkey was brought up, I'd like Garrett to come back up. And Garrett, you're from Waste Management, but you're neutral on this bill. And so maybe you can address some of the things that were mentioned, that you're not looking for an expansion or anything like of that nature. Not opposed to it, not in support of it. So you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Waste Management, where it's trash day every day. So thank you. I appreciate that. When I first saw the bill filed and I looked at the title, my first concern was how it would impact existing operation. Would it be broadly defined on expansion, or just how it could possibly impact? So we took our concerns. Thankfully, the sponsors were agreeable to an amendment to the bill, which is now Section 2, which exempts existing facilities. And really my point of coming today is to kind of point out why that is so important and a key component of this bill for us. And I would say that one word in particular in that section is modification of any landfill. So an active facility like Turnkey, I spoke to my folks there, in any given year, I would say they say about 4 either permit modifications or potentially a new permit for either some new equipment or a new project on site is required to keep that facility going. So again, we feel comfortable that with that exemption language that was adopted to the amendment, that takes us out of the provisions and allows us to continue to operate as we would.
Thank you.
Sure.
Now, if there is a leak with PFAS or something at Turnkey, who absorbs the cost of fixing that?
We would.
You do?
We would report it to any type of issue like that. If it's we would report that. That's a hazardous spill. And I would just so you know, we do have a PFAS treatment facility at our Turnkey site. So
and there's insurances to cover,
sure.
the,
remediate,
right.
do as we need to do. Yes.
So my follow-up was, so if a municipality owns a facility and they have a leak, who pays for that?
I can only assume that it would be the owner of the facility, which would be the
So,
municipality.
one way or another, it's good to have maybe both options available, but, I mean, I'm concerned about the taxpayers as well, because if there's a massive leak, and say in a municipality, the taxpayers would definitely have to absorb that.
I think in any site, even a waste energy, any site could have issues. I mean, there's issues that could come up. There can be accidents. There can be all, so yeah. So there's risks, and insurance and all things that cover some of that risk. It was mentioned earlier about insurance for fires and things. So yeah, I think any site like that is going to have potential ability for problems, but.
And one of the things that we discovered when we were talking about these landfills, if you have a municipality, you can refuse out of state, but turnkey cannot.
It's not that we can't refuse it, we don't have to refuse it. So a public facility may, it comes down to I know this issue comes up in all these issues as Commerce Clause issues, right? So the one way that you can not have to avoid that is not an interstate facility if it's a state-run facility. It becomes a state-owned facility, and you can say, we don't want your material to come in. Whereas a private business can do that, and again, the permit does allow it. It's what was mentioned earlier, it's an unlimited service area permit.
I don't know if you know this question or not, but has Waste Management thought about incineration at all?
So as I mentioned, actually, when I started just down the street in Hampton at the offices of Wheelabrator, who was a waste energy company, was a subsidiary of Waste Management. So I worked on their issues for years. Waste Management decided, I want to say probably 8 or 9 years ago, to sell that component off. And now it's Win Waste, so it's Win, and they have all the waste energy facilities, but they also have some other facilities. So I'm pretty knowledgeable on waste energy. It's kind of where I got my start in the business.
So is there still a moratorium on? Is there a moratorium still on incineration?
So I know there Massachusetts regulations. I'm aware of that. I was not aware that New Hampshire had one. To be
I
honest.
wasn't either.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I know Massachusetts there's a policy. Basically, the DEP says there's a moratorium on mass burn technology.
All right, I'm hogging all the time. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being before us. And I was asked to ask this question to clarify a statement that was made in a letter by Casella to DES in a February letter, which is on their website, the DES website, and it makes an argument that there'll be a shortfall because, and I quote, there's a forecast to drop off in capacity in 2034 with anticipated conclusion of TLR 3's operations, and that's your landfill in Rochester. So I guess I'd like you to comment on behalf of Waste Management on whether that is actually true that 2034 you anticipate you're not being able to get extensions or expansions or so on.
So yeah, so 34 would be where we're permitted today, as we sit here
Yeah.
today, and beyond that. So the short answer is the intention would be to move beyond that date. But from now until then, it will depend pretty highly on what is the statutory and regulatory climate, right? So right now, it would potentially be favorable. If things would change over the next few years that restrict it to a point where we could not do it, then we couldn't. But the intent is right now, yes, we would look to extend beyond that date.
Thank you.
If that helps, if that's an answer to your question. Okay, yeah.
Senator Pearl?
Thank you. Thanks for coming in today.
Of course.
So currently, when you are operating a landfill, you apply for a permit for so many tons per year that you can accept. Is that correct?
Correct. Over a certain number of cells, right? You
Yeah.
gotta do that math there. Yep.
So with the facility that's closing up north, we're gonna lose one here in a couple of years. Even though there may be projected landfill capacity enough to 2034, would that landfill going away, would the remaining landfills have the ability to take care of all of the waste that's coming into the state and still stay within their projected capacities annually?
I would refer to the person who testified before that I look at our facility, right? So I know what we can manage. So I really can't speak exactly to the other facilities and what they can do. But if the math works as to what was stated, then I guess there technically would be enough on the books. Capacity moves in interesting ways, so it's kind of, it's not necessarily easy to just grab it and say you have to go here or there. That's what, again, a state-owned facility would be able to do. But so I guess I can't really answer that specifically because I can only speak to our facility. But if the numbers say it's a certain amount of capacity and the generation is under that, then I guess technically there's adequate capacity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it goes to those facilities.
Yeah, I guess, well, more follow-up if I.
Sorry.
At least what I understood from the previous testimony is there was enough overall capacity to get us through there. But would there be enough annual capacity if we lose one of the landfills? Because you all only have a certain permitted amount per year you can take. That
Right.
was more my question.
Right, I think his point was billing it turnkey, a little over, and then whatever it was at Carberry. So if you add those together, that's an annual, those are the annual
Yeah,
permits.
okay.
So if the annual generation is under that, then again, technically, it would cover that, I guess.
Yeah. I do have a couple more questions. I don't know if they're suitable for you or not, but I'm gonna throw them out to you, and if you can't answer.
You throw them out, and I will,
Perhaps
if
those
I
come
can't
in.
answer them, I will give you the answer, Senator, I promise you that.
All right, well, so I guess when was the last new landfill sited in the state of New Hampshire?
As far as like a greenfield, like out of, so
A brand-
Turnkey's been
brand new
there,
facility.
let's say Turnkey's been there for about 40 years. I can't speak to any of the municipal facilities, but
Yeah.
we've been there for quite some time now.
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know if this is one for you to answer or
Yeah.
not, but I'll throw it out, and anybody who wants to comment
Yeah.
later on can. And the second one is, what's the typical period of time it takes to complete the process for permitting a new landfill?
Years.
So-
Our most recent was, I can get you an exact time frame, but it was several years, again, because you would then have to build in appeals, and that then,
Yeah.
ours went all the way to the Supreme Court of the state. I mean, it's a long period.
Well, I just want to
A
make
to
sure
Z.
as we're looking at this, and if we put a moratorium in place until 28, and we're looking at that number of 2034 looming in front of us, and it takes years to do it, I just want to make sure we're not backing ourselves into a corner. That's really my
So
question,
it's
because I don't know the answer. I know we've had many
Great question.
landfill bills that have gone through when I was in the House and here in the Senate for, well, this is my 8th year, and I think we've had landfill bills just about every single one of them. And I just know there's a lengthy process to doing that. I want to make sure.
great
just
question.
Be certain that we're not backing ourselves into a corner by putting a moratorium.
I could get you a better understanding of exactly what it
Yeah.
took us and get
Okay.
you more information on that.
Well, and again, I kind of threw these out because I know there's more folks coming behind
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Perhaps
yeah,
we can
yeah.
get
Yep.
some input on
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
So I'm just thinking in the future that if there is a moratorium now, if this bill goes through and you have the same sentiment about waste management wanting to expand or create a new one, when you see bills like this come up, what does that signal to you as a company? Is it worth doing? Can we get through this? Will the rug be pulled out from underneath us? And I'm being frank, just because people need to know. This is a concern that I do have. Is that when applications are put in, if somebody puts in a bill after you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and they say, we're going to put the brakes on this, how do you recoup your money? Number one, does it send a signal to other companies out there? New Hampshire's too much of a high risk to provide something like this. So just your perspective on that, because that is a concern that I do have. I want to make that clear. I know we can, but we have probably the same issues with municipals or government or state-owned, which I'm willing to entertain the conversation, but the larger picture is, what are we sending the signal out there into the business universe?
I think, again, from my perspective, and I wish my associate Steve Podgy, who is our disposal director for the area, and he's in New Hampshire, he's on the solid waste working group. We as a company understand, I think we understand, and we've been dealing with this for quite a few years, all sorts of issues. I know importation is a very big issue for the state, and we understand that. This is not the only state that grapples with that, right? So we're really engaged in every bill that gets filed. We are on the regulations. So I think generally we understand these are complex issues, and so what we're trying to do is work with the regulators, work with the legislators to figure out the best path forward. So I can't really say that we don't want to deal with New Hampshire anymore or anything. That's not the case. We're proud to operate, and we look forward to hopefully there being an opportunity to be in the state beyond 34. So I definitely understand your point. I don't think it's to a point where we're like, it's too much work. It does take work. These aren't easy situations, So I guess as we're trying to work with you all to develop, what was mentioned, better recycling. How do we minimize the material that needs to be disposed of? We're at the table. We're trying to work through that kind of stuff. So, it's not easy. We're here to commit to work with you all, but we're not, shy about, looking to try to continue to operate here well into the future.
So this doesn't send shockwaves or anything like that to you?
I mean, listen, we're here, so we want to just have that conversation. That's really important, is that we can continue to discuss it, right? And give you our perspective. Now, you don't have to necessarily appreciate it or agree with us, but we'll be part of the process, and we'll try to work through and get the best thing that works for everybody, and so, yeah, I guess the point is we understand the concerns, and we're here to try to help you understand our industry a little bit better, too.
Thank you very much. Senator Waters with a question?
No.
No? Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate you coming up.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right. I'm going to try it, this name. Muriel? Did I get that right? Look at that. Dyslexia, and so I do my best. Oh,
It's the big one.
yeah. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. My name is Muriel Robinette. I've been an environmental consultant in the state of New Hampshire for the last 40 years, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the North Country ABC, my client, and also speak in favor of this bill. I'm passing out a short handout that summarizes my remarks. As a technical person, I support this bill for two primary reasons. One is that New Hampshire has not been terribly focused on reducing the source of waste in their waste stream. Finally, 2 years ago, we passed a solid waste plan, updated for the state, and in that, we have a goal, 25% reduction in our source within 10 years. We're already 2 years into it, and we've only reduced 3%. That takes leadership, that takes focus, that takes education. And our small department of environmental services that focuses on solid waste is strapped for resources. And they're very focused on trying to permit another landfill that, according to others, indicate we do not need that capacity. And so, for the sake of the legislators' edict that there be a solid waste management plan in which landfilling is at the very lowest priority of dealing with solid waste, we should not be focusing on permitting another landfill at this time when we have excess capacity. So that's my first reason as to why technically I support this bill, where we take a pause and we focus on what our priorities actually need to be within the state in regard to solid waste. The other reason I support this bill is because we are in the middle of rulemaking. We don't build landfills here in New Hampshire every week or every year. They are sources of contamination that we have to engineer, control, monitor, take care of, and tweak and respond to daily. And so the next one we build, let's get it right. And so to take a pause means that we can focus on what we need to focus on, which is not creating additional excess capacity. We can focus on how these rules are going to represent best management practices so that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren do not have to deal with contamination issuing from the next landfill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. We did talk a little bit about incineration. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm sorry.
Incineration.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not talking about incineration.
I know. I've just, you can see the narrative coming from me. I'd like to at least discuss that more in the future because we can reduce the tonnage by 2/3.
Yes, you can reduce it.
Yeah.
That's part of that hierarchy and a way of dealing with your source.
Yeah. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Matt Leahy from the Forest Society. Five.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Forest Society. We do support the bill. And we do that with understanding that there has been a lot of activity on this whole issue of solid waste management here at the legislature, of course, but at DES and the New Hampshire Solid Waste Work Group. So there's been a lot going on. But I think, as a number of other people have mentioned, we do need to get this policy right. And for us at the Forest Society, that really goes back to sort of a basic point, is that, once a property, if a property were to be converted into a solid waste landfill, it will be a landfill forever. So even though there's, could be some other activities that could happen once that landfill ceases its operation, everything that's buried under it will remain. So again, we have to be, really, again, as people have said, let's get our policies right before we, permit. And I think when we look at the bill, it does seem a reasonable way to get us more time to do that. The date was moved from 2031 to 2028. It doesn't put in place a blanket prohibition on any new landfills. It just says for the next 4 years, let's look at all the policies and stuff that we need to look at. And of course, it doesn't apply to existing landfills either. And from what I understand, the language does allow DES to accept and investigate, and now suspension is in place. So, to us, those are reasonable accommodations, and they kind of get to the reality that we will keep generating trash in our state. That's the reality. But let's figure out better ways to either reduce that amount of the trash or to do different things with it once it has been generated. So again, we just think this bill is a reasonable way to get us to better outcomes.
Just curious. Thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
We lost our bio plant up north, right? And so
Yes.
the wood industry is having to put their waste wood somewhere, and instead of using it for energy, do they end up in the landfills?
Typically, and that is a good question. Typically, if the logging operation doesn't have a place for that low grade wood, they may just leave it in the woods.
Thank you.
So again, that's
just giving a plug. That's all.
No, I agree. We are totally with you on that issue.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. And Kirsten from BIA. I keep, is it Kirsten or Kristen? Kirsten. It's Kirsten. Kirsten. Oh my gosh. Kirsten. You got it. Gotcha. Kirsten. I can be taught.
I'm not so sure about that.
Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. I appreciate that you keep trying to get it right.
I got somebody who holds me in line here. So.
Well, good morning again. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, and I'm representing the Business and Industry Association, here today to express BIA's opposition to House Bill 1620. As established by BIA's public policy priorities, we support science-based environmental policies that balance economic development and long-term sustainability of the state's natural resources. Unfortunately, we have concerns regarding this bill. We don't believe that this proposal strikes that delicate balance. First, we believe that this bill is unnecessary. This year already, the solid waste rules are currently in the process of being updated by the department. That's already happening this year, so we don't see a need for a pause. Further, we're concerned that the year 2028 has been arbitrarily determined. It's an unreasonably long timeline to have this moratorium. Also, landfill siting, permitting, and development, that process takes years to complete, 6 to 10 years, I believe. So this moratorium does not allow for us to move forward in a reasonable time to maintain capacity. We also believe that if this bill passes, that will lead to the shortage of capacity, and waste will have to be shipped out of state for disposal. And not only is that problematic for just the solid waste industry, it's also problematic for businesses of all industries because that cost for solid waste disposal out of state is more expensive. Additionally, shipping waste out of state has unintended consequences. It increases the carbon footprint because that waste has to be shipped out of state. And that's completely contrary to federal and state carbon reduction goals and could be a primary reason to not pass this bill. So in conclusion, we ask that the committee finds this bill inexpedient to legislate. This bill would be damaging to New Hampshire's business climate, future economic development, and could result in unintended environmental impacts as the affordable in-state capacity becomes more scarce.
Could you repeat the carbon section of your testimony again? What?
Sure. So shipping waste out of state has unintended consequences, such as increasing carbon footprint associated with shipping the waste out of state. This is contrary to federal and state carbon reduction goals.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's see, Sarah? Smile. I had to say it. The song.
I know the song.
Yeah.
Good morning again, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sarah Uhas Kern, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Waste Management Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on House Bill 1620. DES opposes this bill because it suspends solid waste permitting processes that are important to maintaining a stable solid waste market in the state, and it could result in impacts to capacity within the state that could have economic impacts. As you know, the bill would suspend permitting of new landfills in the state until 2028, while continuing to allow DES to permit the expansion of existing landfills. While our projections suggest that overall landfill capacity in New Hampshire exceeds the projected need past the 2028 date, these projections do not take into account the geographic locations of the capacity or the fact that landfills can accept waste that is generated outside of New Hampshire. When you consider those factors, disallowing permitting of new capacity could cause the amount and location of solid waste disposal to be limited in a way that would increase transportation costs and could drive the costs of disposal up. While the bill does allow for permitting of expansions at existing landfills to continue, existing landfills may not be positioned or inclined to seek permits for additional disposal capacity prior to 2028, so we can't rely solely upon potential landfill expansions to solve a possible problem of reduced capacity. Earlier, there was a question about how long it takes to permit a landfill, a new landfill, and that's many years, up to 10 years. So, and as we heard earlier today in the testimony for House Bill 602, already the permitting process is bifurcated with first essentially a proof of concept that requires approval by DES, and then the applicant puts the details to their design and needs to get construction approval for their design of their landfill. So given those steps necessary in the process and the length of time that it takes to permit a new landfill, one could run up against a problem of capacity before a new landfill got permitted. That summarizes DES's concerns about the bill. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. Just a couple of things. Could you discuss a little bit further the issue, the kind of context about the capacity issue, meaning that it's less the overall state capacity as what it might mean for certain catchment areas and their ability to transport their trash. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the process by which DES projects the capacity need is given to us in statute, and it does not include considerations like the waste that is disposed of in-state from out-of-state. So of course that would reduce the overall capacity for in-state waste compared to what the calculations show. And it also is overall, not different regions of the state. One might say that it's a benefit to different regions of the state to have outlet for their solid waste in their regions.
If I may. Yeah, thank you. And, you heard my earlier questions about legal considerations, and I see what Commissioner Scott has mentioned in his letter about whether we're advantaging or disadvantaging existing as opposed to potentially new sites. And but what I also wanted to know about is if you have any further thoughts about the issue as to whether or not the stage at which the Casella permit is at, that if the moratorium were to say that that could not be continued or issued until 2028, that might create an opportunity for a lawsuit as to whether or not a moratorium could do that. I don't, I'm not an attorney, and I just want to make sure we're not getting the state in a tight spot legally.
It would be inappropriate for me to comment on a permit
I knew she was
application
gonna say
that
that.
we are currently reviewing. I did hear the statement earlier during this hearing, a statement that our commissioner is concerned about a lawsuit. That is not a statement that has been in any of our testimony, and you'll see that's not in the letter of testimony.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, you can. Go for it.
Could you see whether or not the commissioner thinks it might be helpful to ask the Attorney General to give an opinion on that matter?
Or should we do it directly?
Our agency has ongoing discussions with the Attorney General's office about things like this. So far, I don't have an answer to share. You may wish to ask your own questions as well.
Thank you.
We should get an opinion.
I guess.
It wouldn't hurt.
I think
Unless the House has already
I
done
think
that.
maybe we could ask the commissioner to ask the Attorney General, because what do I know?
Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative, did the House ask the Attorney General's office, about any legal issue?
Not that I'm aware of, but if it did, it would have come out of the Environment and Agriculture Committee, and I'm
Okay. All right, yeah, okay. No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Wayne? You thought I forgot you, didn't you? No. We get paid big bucks for doing this. No.
It gets to her, not to us.
Oh, I haven't forgotten. Yeah.
Chairman Avard and committee, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
And your name is?
My name is Wayne Morrison, and I am president of an organization called North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. I'll try, in the interest of sanity and in the interest of time, I won't read my testimony, but I'll try and paraphrase what I think are the important principles that I'm trying to convey in my support for this bill. You've heard a lot of testimony. There's been a lot of discussion about capacity. And I think the state of New Hampshire, for a number of years now, there have been a number of flashing lights, cautionary warning lights regarding our solid waste situation. And things like PFAS and out-of-state waste have now become very visible and very much discussed. A few years ago, no one knew what PFAS was, and now you can't turn on the TV, or you can't look online without a story about the toxicity of it. There's also a lot of discussion about rules and about new studies coming out, the latest one being about methane emissions. I think there's like 5 things I want to convey to you. First of all, we benefit right now from a booming economy in New Hampshire. We're all about outdoors and a recreation economy. And, and as individuals in the state, like most Americans, we have come to expect clean drinking water and to be able to use the great outdoors as we see fit. But that's no longer a given. And we see examples all over the state, the people in Merrimack. There's many examples of the best laid plans gone south and the ramifications of it. So landfilling, thankfully, a couple of years ago, the department, in conjunction with the Solid Waste Working Group, updated its solid waste plan. And for the first time in almost 2 decades, we have a real plan that's measurable. And the department has essentially said, we want to get out of the landfill business. We want to be in the diversion business. What we should be focusing on, you said earlier, Senator, it's either landfilling or incinerating. Those have been our only 2 choices, but we have a hierarchy that says, in fact, those are the last 2 things we want to do. We really want to be focused on, for example, food waste, which ends up being 25 or 30% of what goes into a landfill, doesn't have to go into a landfill. And in fact, that's a big part of the methane emissions problem that you're going to hear more and more about going forward. This plan says we want to go in a different direction. Yeehaw, we are thrilled to hear it. But our actions are disconnected from our goals. We are headed down a path of business as usual. We are letting a landfill application drive our strategy. That makes no sense to me. We have to be proactive. I have not talked to anybody in the legislature. I haven't talked to any of my friends in New Hampshire or in Massachusetts. When I say that 50% of our trash comes from out of state, they universally say, you're kidding. Followed by, why are you letting that happen? I think this issue is percolated to the point where the House and the Senate want to do something. But we can't let that decision process play out after we issue another permit. Once the horse is out of the barn, the damage is done, and we live with these things for generations. Now is the time. When we think about the capacity discussion, everybody talks about 2034. DES has a model that they use to analyze capacity. And you have a lot of moving parts, so you have to make assumptions and you have to have some limitations. It's not that complicated in this decision. The largest landfill in the state, operated by Waste Management and Turnkey, is 5 times bigger than the next biggest landfill. I mean, it dwarfs all the other landfills. I think you heard inklings today. The only reason 2034 becomes the date that we need more capacity is because the assumption is they go out of business in 2034. And you can, if you were a betting man, that's absolutely not going to happen. They will continue to expand. They have room to expand. They have good business. They have a good relationship with the city. Every indication is they will continue. So our model is as good as the input you put into it. And if you assume that they're going to close, that's the wrong assumption. It's one phone call. It's get a letter of intent, but let's not go off and make some stupid decision that we can't take back, that we don't have to. This is the perfect time for us to stop and try and resolve several critical issues. The overarching problem in the state, the only thing driving capacity issues, is the amount of out-of-state waste. The 6 landfills and the incineration facilities that we have in the state are more than enough to handle all the trash that New Hampshire generates for the next 100 years. We wouldn't need another landfill. The only thing driving the problem is private operators who are unrestricted land service areas and a profit motive to draw trash in, mostly from Massachusetts. We need to stop that. This is an opportunity to explore the avenues. I don't know if we're going to get sued. I don't care if we get sued. I want to fight for what's right for the city, for the state of New Hampshire. Lawyers will figure that out, but as legislators, aren't you there to put policies in place that reflect what you think is the right thing for New Hampshire to do? As a citizen, that's why we vote for you. That's what we want you to do. I want you to fight for what's best for New Hampshire. Those are, I have in the last 5 years actively involved in this. I've gotten a great appreciation. You are volunteers like we are. You are doing lots of work for no money. And I know it's complicated. But we will never get a better opportunity to step back and do a reset. This solid waste plan says we're not going to make incremental little improvements. We're going to change the way the train is running. We're going to move to diversion. We're going to stop landfilling. We're actually going to do the pretty picture that we put with the hierarchy. We ignore it. We go off and we just issue more capacity. And in the past, 30 years ago, that was fine. Nobody knew about the toxicity problems. Nobody knew about PFAS. Nobody was worried about water quality. But today is a very different picture. Landfills are complicated, toxic sites that we have to worry about decades after we close them. We need to wake up now, take the actions, buy some time, just like those study committees that you went off on. We got an education, we focus on some particular subject matters. I don't know if it's incineration. That may well be part of the problem, part of the solution. But right now, business as usual will turn out very, very bad for the people in the North Country, and in fact, for people all over the state. This is a perfect time to stop, go off and assess what we need to do. And by the way, I think the Department of Environmental Services needs your help. They can't do this alone. When I talk to Director Wimsatt or anybody in the department, they can't stop out-of-state waste. They need legislative action to figure out how to do that. They, in a moment of clarity, we would all say, nobody is for more out-of-state trash. That's not a business we want to be in. The private companies make money, and the state takes all the environmental risk, all the hazards, and all the problems that go along with it. And who pays for it at the end? Well, there's a monetary problem, but more than anything, there's a human problem. You talk to people that live near these things, or the people in Merrimack who are drinking bottled water or have health problems. These are very real issues, and you have a chance to impact the lives of people going forward. We will never have a better chance to do that than right now. This bill is not that complicated. You heard all kinds of estimates. It's going to take a decade to put a new landfill in place. I've seen articles by Casella that's, they're going to be anxious to get that thing up and running the day that the other landfill, NCES, closes. A lot of that time frame is taken up with the application and all of the, the 1,000 feet and all the documents and all. Nobody is debating. There's a lot of work. But guess what? A lot of that work is already behind them. And this bill doesn't even stop the thing from moving forward to completion. They just can't issue a permit. By the way, I don't want that permit to go through. I think it's a mistake. Wrong site, And finally, the thing I would leave you with, rules. We talk about a lot of things, but when you talk to DES, they say, we follow the rules. There are some rules that they actually, the ones they're working on now, they have an opportunity to change. And there's some that you need to give to them. You need to take the policies that you think are best for the state, and you need to articulate them so that DES has a roadmap. This is what we want you to do. This is our intent. We went almost 2 decades It's unbelievable. We went 2 decades without a plan, without measuring anything, and we paid a huge price for that. New Hampshire is behind every other state in our region. And it is not a secret that because of that, we are the patsies taking all this trash from out of state, because it's easier to put it here. Why would we let that happen? We are, New Hampshire, it's the New Hampshire miracle. We're supposed to be smart and nimble, and even though we're small, we're the group that knows how to do it better. We get out in front of things. We stand up to problems. We don't run away from them. But that is not what we've done with solid waste. And you have a chance to do something about that. I know the governor doesn't like this. He's on the way out. There's going to be a new administration. And I've talked to them, and I think they have a different view of this problem. And lawyers and governors, I'm asking you to do the right thing. Think about this problem. Think about if you lived in that area, if you heard that there was a landfill going in that we don't need, and that is going to put your family, your farm, your water at risk, why the hell would we do that? Now is the perfect time to step back and sort this thing out and figure it out and take action. And work with DES and work with your colleagues in the House. And if you don't like the language or you think something, let's talk about it. But let's not let another legislative session go by without doing something. Let's not let the legacy be, we were the body that let the last new landfill go in that we didn't need. Who wants that on their resume? Show some courage, get behind this bill. Let's make something happen for the people in New Hampshire. Now's the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Linda?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Linda Haskins. I represent Rockingham 11 Exeter. I too just came from the subcommittee because I serve on environment and agriculture. This is my first term. I didn't know anything about trash before this, and I'm learning a lot. And the thing that's never made sense to me, which I have expressed vehemently to DES, is that we have a permit being evaluated while we are doing a 10-year rulemaking update. They are up against it, trying to do both these things. And I will not bore you with the details of our committee sessions, but there really is no answer to that. And what Mr. Morrison just said, more eloquently than I could say, is this is an opportunity to put a pause in. We have learned that there are dangers abroad in terms of this trash removal. We don't need trucks coming all through the state to go up north from Massachusetts. So we have several issues involved with this. The pause is the only way we can get answers to this and have the time to think it through and do it right and allow DES to do the rulemaking and for the rest of us to investigate what we need to know before we make a decision about another landfill. That's it.
Well done.
Thank you.
Very much. No questions from the committee? And our final speaker, Eric Steinhauser.
Good morning again. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser, Senior Vice President with Sanborn Head and Associates. We're a New Hampshire-based engineering firm. Provided my written testimony, I'll know we've been here long. I will be quick. But just to point out a couple things, HB 1620 has certain objectives which I don't think the text of the bill meets, and let me explain why. Terminology means a lot for the regulated community and those that are trying to help them through things. So there's already definitions in the existing rules and existing legislation, Chapter 149M. And the objective of HB 1620 is to address landfill siting, public benefit, in alignment with solid waste management goals. Those are already covered in the rules that we have to date. What's trying to be done here is to not provide a construction permit. Again, permits for construction is the term. I see that as problematic because any permit you're trying to get for a landfill is to construct it. So for a potential appeal to the Waste Management Council, which I also sit on, I could see conflicts with the legislation in regard to that, because any permit, whether it's the initial permit for a proof of concept or the construction permit we talked about earlier, is going to be in conflict. I provided at the end of my written testimony a timeline. Some comments were brought about the timing of landfills. This is an idealized timeline in terms of years, not actual dates or anything, and it's not for a specific landfill. But just to give you an idea, if you were just to pick a site and to when you get to approval to put waste in the ground, could be as much or more than 12 years. And for example, Senator Pearl had asked about the Turnkey site. How long did that take to permit? My firm was involved with that. We started in 2013. Waste has not gone into the first sale yet. That's scheduled for this spring. There's a lot of work that goes into that in terms of initial engineering, permitting with all the different agencies, state and local and federal, lots of construction that has to happen, and all other approvals to get to there. So it is a very long time. Having a moratorium of any amount of time is going to be detrimental to new projects. Another aspect is, which I don't think is an intended consequence of the bill, but if and this happens in the industry, assets are sold between companies. So the way the bill is written, if you don't own that particular site at a certain time and you want to do an expansion, you no longer have the exemption to do your expansion. So if Company A wants to sell to Company B can no longer do an expansion at that site because they didn't own it within that time frame. There's references to water bodies transversing footprints. Footprint is a very specific term in the rules. The rules right now, you can't have that situation. So the law doesn't make sense with regard to existing rules. We don't have water bodies going through landfill footprints. And there's reference to the EPA rules. It's very broad and needs to be more specific for this rule, for this law to be, or this bill to be effective. I want to just touch on a couple of things. Most permits, at least the recent ones in the last, I'd say 5 years, that are issued by the Department of Environmental Services require that the applicant adhere to the rules that are in place at the time. So if you haven't constructed all your phases and there's a rule change that changes your design, you have to follow that new design. So the comment earlier about following new rules as they're made, landfills have to do that now. It's already in place. And they want to do that. They want to be current with the current rules. There was comments about landfill performance. To my knowledge, in New Hampshire and elsewhere, the Subtitle D, the RCRA Subtitle D lined landfills are not leaking. They're not the cause of groundwater problems. It's the older unlined dumps that we have in the state that are really the problem, or the waste that we find on the sides of the street because people can't afford to take their waste to proper disposal areas. Senator Pearl had asked about capacity. The last couple of permit application approvals that I've seen from the department look at limiting how much waste can come into a site on a per year basis. So even though you might have this much capacity, you're limited what you can put in every year. So if a facility, for whatever reason, a rule change stops them from taking waste and they have to find another outlet, those facilities might not be able to take the additional waste because they're limited by their permit and by the public benefit analysis that was done when it was originally permitted. So just because there's capacity doesn't mean it's capacity for everyone. City of Nashua only takes City of Nashua waste. They are, to my understanding, the last large permit that was issued by the state for expansion at an existing landfill. No, I'm not aware of a greenfield or brand-new landfill that's been permitted since the 1990s. So we're trying to use existing facilities the best we can. The only reason a client would go to a new site is because they're not allowed to expand an existing site. So having rules or laws in place that prevent expansions at existing sites where they can use all the existing infrastructure, not have to build a lot more, and have a lot of other disturbance of areas and get into other siting criteria, only makes sense. And kind of jumbled here, but I've heard a lot of different jumbling in the testimony for here. And I'm just trying to help you all kind of pull it together for what a moratorium would mean for the state. And I'll leave it there and leave you with my written testimony.
Would it be fair to say that you're pretty acquainted with the rules that are already in existence?
Yes, I work with those every day.
And as you see them, do you think that they need to be tweaked for more safety? I mean, I'm hearing that the rules right now are inadequate. At least that's how I'm interpreting.
I don't think they're inadequate as they are. Like anything, it can be tweaked to make it better and clearer. We've had appeals because there's been misinterpretations of how they're applied. The original rules were, many times ago, and the folks that wrote those had certain intentions, and the regulators at that time had certain intentions. Those staff have changed. The interpretations have changed. Me and my colleagues have made suggestions to DES in written form for proposed changes to make them better, to take away some of the ambiguity in the rules, to make them more specific. Some of those were heard, some of them weren't, just like I'm sure they've heard from others. They work now. We have good facilities. Someone had mentioned about releases from landfills. They're not coming from the liner systems. They're coming from other aspects of operations. Can things be tighter? Sure. We're always looking to make things better. As professional engineers, we're always going through continuing education to make us better. I attend conferences and listen and learn from other people's problems, so I cannot do the same thing, and people can learn from our lessons learned. So I think the proposed rules, if I've seen them most recently, are a move forward. Do I agree with all of them? No. But I'm sure others agree on the other side. So you're in a great position to hear a lot of viewpoints, and this is a great country that we can get those viewpoints and try to make the right decision. So I thank you for that role that you play.
Senator Pearl with a question.
Thank you for taking my question. So we've heard tap the brakes here from several people here today. I'm trying to understand from the comments that you made about issuing any permits whatsoever. Would that be more like putting the car in park than tapping the brakes? I mean, it's because we heard that the DES could continue to consider applications during this moratorium, but if you're saying that they can't even accept any type of a permit, that would kind of stop the whole process, wouldn't it?
So just to be clear, the bill says DES can review stuff, but they can't issue a permit for construction.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm not representing a site or an entity here, I'm just as I view it. So if I had a client that wanted to develop a site and they don't know that they can get a permit because it's been delayed, why would they start the process? Because there might be other changes. So yes, we know what the rules are now, and we know what they might be. So there's educated risks that they would take. There are processes that they can do that they know what those risks are. If there's a moratorium that maybe it gets extended again, maybe there's other things that add on to their timeline. As we add timeline, costs do go up. Right, so the money we spend now is cheaper than the money we spend in the future. Whether it's a city or a town or a private company, there is a fiscal responsibility they need to do through their stakeholders. As we go through looking for new sites, it's harder and harder to find one. There was comment about one landfill for the next 100 years in the state. That was news to me. I don't know how we would do that. There's other issues behind that. Someone's not going to want that landfill because it's going to be a new landfill somewhere. We don't have, as far as I understand, a site that's going to do 100 years of capacity for the whole state. The infrastructure that would have to support that is quite extensive. If you've been to a Turnkey or a North Country or a City of Nashua, whatever, it's not a small facility. There's a lot going on. And to permit something with all the aspects of that, that timeline is not too far off. I mean, it's idealized because make some assumptions, this would go well, this would go really, but, you know, like I said, initial work on the turnkey landfill started in 2013. And that was just before DES even knew about it. The client had to figure out, does this work for us? Can we make it move forward?
So I just want to make sure I'm clear. Yeah, thank you. Is there, this puts a moratorium on the statutory process for issuing permits.
Permits for construction.
Okay, so that wouldn't be any of the permits for doing, you know, there must be some permits along the way to start the process. I guess that's the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, so I'm not an attorney, but my experience has been any permit that allows you to build in the future can be considered a permit for construction. Because what's the intent of getting that permit? Is to build that. So I don't want to give my attorney friends something to come against a project, but that's how I would view it.
Thank you. I'm just trying to make sure I understand.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure I understood.
And that's my interpretation of what that terminology means.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Waters? No. You sure? Yeah. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
And with that, we're